Hey, Jim. Great to see you again. And we are back with a special President's Day episode. So not that that's where all of our conversation has to land today, but
Happy President's Day.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's one of the fun facts I want to get to. At the federal level, it's actually not called it's not called President's Day. Do you know what it's called at the federal level officially?
I don't.
Washington's birthday. Oh. That's the actual official federal holiday. I actually, 27 years into life, I
haven't gotten to that yet.
Yeah. For those of you at home, this is Jim's book that he's been reading, and he's trucking along. I don't know, they're page like 20 or something. But
Washington: A Life by the great author Ron Chernow, probably one of the leading American historical authors.
I actually haven't heard of him, so I'll need to see what other historical figures he's written about, or maybe I'll have to pick that one up after you get through it, because I guess we can get to that now, where I was thinking we can cover some recommendations of presidential biographies, whether it's in book form. I know there is a popular series about John Adams on HBO. I don't know if you ever watched that. That was really my first deep look, if you can call it that, into his history and his terms in office. And then I learned
David McCullough.
Yeah, okay.
He wrote the book Adams. It's a book about John Adams, and I haven't read it yet, but
I think he also wrote the Mornings on Horseback Theodore Roosevelt book.
Sounds right. He also wrote Truman, which I have read.
Okay.
And as a result of that, now this is David McCullough, not Ron Chernow, but as a result of that book, I would say, well, Harry Truman is probably the president, in the past president that I know most about.
Okay.
And I consider him one of my favorite presidents.
Wow. So let's, I guess, jump not all the way back up my list of notes for today's episode, but I do have a short list of least favorite presidents that he was the last one I added to that list.
Truman?
Yep. And the reason why, because... And I guess maybe this should be a point for him in the sense that he recalls that it was not a great decision. But before he left office, he gave birth to what became the CIA. And he said that was his biggest regret, where he basically gave the CIA paramilitary operating authority. So the resources and the personnel from the military could be used for CIA operations. And that, he said, was his biggest regret. And that's, I think, one of the bigger, turning points in our society. Just, we see it now in Trump's administration, where he's trying to, get all of that crookedness, for lack of a better way to frame it, out of the CIA, out of the FBI, where they're supposed to be, protecting the American people from, domestic and foreign adversaries. And it seems like more often than not, those groups are actually working against the American people. And I don't want to say more often than not, but there's certainly many documented cases that aren't conspiracy theories, that are conspiracies of them actively working against the American people. So I think we have Harry Truman, by and large, to thank for that. I'm not saying, in entirety, but
I think of him just real quick.
I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, he Missouri boy.
I've heard that.
Farmer, and he would say he was a failed farmer because I think there was a boll weevil, or there was a cotton problem with boll weevils, and there was a big problem with farming. It's some kind of a locust or something, I can't remember, but he decided to give up farming. Then he went into the haberdashery industry in Kansas City, owned a men's clothing shop, failed. Then he became a public judge, and the guy who sponsored him was named, I think it was Pendergast, and he was basically a local mafia guy. He had ties to organized crime. So Truman had that blemish on his record all through, and the Republican Party utilized that against him as they campaigned against him. And they were always like, he's tied in with the mafia. And I asked my grandparents about Harry Truman. He was a World War I artillery officer and did not have a college education. And came back from World War I and got into these businesses and they failed. Then he became that local judge, and then his political career was launched. And I asked my grandparents, and they said, my grandparents, I would say, were lifetime old school Democrats, and then they became Republican. But they said Harry Truman, in their opinion, was one of the best presidents we ever had. He's the guy that coined the phrase, "the buck stops here." Yep. And interestingly, when he got into politics at the federal level and became, I think, a senator or a congressman for Missouri, he got involved with FDR at the time, was, president, and he was a ways from being the vice president, right? One of his first jobs was to go around to U.S. military installations and look for waste, fraud, and abuse. And he went in with that Missouri boy attitude of, I'm gonna get to the bottom of this. And he uncovered a lot of fraud and a lot of wasteful spending, and the American people applauded him. And Roosevelt is quoted as saying, "Yeah, I assigned him to that job, didn't I?" He tried to take kind of credit as he was one of the, government guys that was going in and cleaning up corruption and whatnot. And Harry was just a real hard, straight-laced guy. And he was political, of course, but he went on to, through a lot of political maneuvering, he became vice president or on the ticket. It happened at the Democratic Convention. This was before Roosevelt's third time around, right, as president. Yep. And then he died, and he was, Truman became VP, and then Roosevelt later died before he finished his term, and then Harry inherited the presidency, and everybody thought that he wouldn't, because he inherited it, they felt that he would not survive going through the primary process and actually getting elected. He did the famous whistle stop tour where he campaigned. Does this sound like anybody you might know? He went all over the country on train. And
Theodore Roosevelt, too. I know you're talking about Donald Trump, but very similar.
He went around, and the guy that he was, Thomas Dewey, who was a big crime fighter in New York. I think he is former FBI guy, and he got into politics. I could be wrong on that, but he was a DA, I believe. And I'm trying to remember back, and this is so spontaneous, and it's a long time ago when I read the book, but everyone thought Dewey had the polish of more of a statesman-like guy. Harry was kind of rough around the edges and a real direct, kind of gruff and in-your-face kind of guy, farmer, not very sophisticated. And everyone thought that Dewey was going to annihilate him, and he just continued to stay out on the road and continue to travel and see the American people. And what's weird is, as he continued this famous whistle stop tour, the crowds started getting bigger and bigger, and before long, it was massive crowds coming to hear Truman speak. And there's that famous picture of Truman holding up a copy of the Chicago Tribune, the front page. Chicago Tribune has historically been a Republican-backed paper. Okay. So there's a picture of Truman standing there holding this newspaper up with a kind of a shit-eating grin on his face. And it says, the headline is, Dewey beats Truman, or Dewey defeats Truman. They just felt for sure he was going to lose, so they went on ahead and published that. Of course, they had to throw all those papers out because he won that election. Wow. So anyway, I have a place in my heart for Harry Truman.
Yeah, and again, I added him onto that list again as the last person on that short list. But
sorry to interrupt you. Yeah. Also, the formation of the state of Israel, and the tough decision that had to be made of whether or not to drop the atomic bombs on Japan. Yep. And the big argument was, that all these civilians were killed, which is terrible. Right. And his argument was, well, based on what we saw at Iwo Jima and Okinawa and through the Pacific Island campaign, how tenacious the Japanese fought and how they were preparing their civilian population to repel an invasion, the amount of American life that would have been lost had we gone and attacked the island of Japan. So he made the decision to drop the atomic bombs. And later in life, on his deathbed, he was asked again, "Sir, would you do it again?" And he said, "Yeah, I would do it again." Yeah. So he had some tough decisions, and he was also instrumental in the formation of the state of Israel.
And you're not going to bat 1,000, right? No one is, and that's where I definitely would love to go and get more details about his history beyond, my current understanding. Of course, he's notable for saying you don't get you don't get rich in politics unless you're a crook or something like that. And I'm paraphrasing that. I think that was attributed to him. And then, notably that he died not penniless, but essentially, and like left office essentially penniless. And that's where the presidential pension actually came from, because they felt bad for Truman that, he wasn't going to be taken care of after he literally served America in the highest office, and he was going to die with nothing to show for it.
Amazing.
Yeah. Amazing, right?
I wonder how he would feel about the state of affairs, political affairs today. I wonder how Harry Truman.
It would be interesting to see how a lot of past historical figures, both political and not, think about the world today.
Yeah.
But for sure him. So one other sort of interesting tidbit fun fact that I found out while I was just looking into President's Day. So George Washington's birthday was February 22nd, and that's when Washington's birthday used to be celebrated, or, as we know it, President's Day. And then Lincoln's birthday, I think, is also sometime around here in February. And then I think Jefferson is in April. So going like state by state, and even within like municipalities, like cities, counties, they'll celebrate the holiday differently, if at all. Some will actually call it like Washington and Lincoln's Day instead of President's Day. Some will just call it, Washington's Day or Washington's birthday. But in reading about all of this, so George Washington's birthday, as I said, was February 22nd, 1732. But that's according to our new Gregorian calendar. And actually, when he was born and up until about 1752, when the British Empire adopted the Julian calendar, he wrote that his birthday was February 11th, 1731. So it wasn't just 11 days off, but it was a whole year off, because the calendar was... I think the Gregorian calendar that was followed previously, the Julian calendar that was followed previously, that was on like a March was the beginning of the year. And then now, of course, it's January in the new Julian calendar. And so for a period of, I don't know how long, but back in like the 18th century, 1750s, there was what's called dual dating. So you would write 2 days of the month as well as 2 years, and often cases
because it was
you
could use either calendar,
right?
And you didn't know which one people were
using, and that's just like a forgotten part of history. I feel like how like world changing that would be for us to just adopt a new calendar, and that's something that obviously a long time ago for us, but really not that long ago in the grand scheme of history, right? So I thought that was fairly interesting. But going into, you touched on Truman. Any other presidents stick out maybe on a short list of favorite presidents for you? I can maybe go through mine
real quick for me, just real quick. Abraham Lincoln, I would say, would be the greatest president of our country.
Okay, maybe.
Well, George Washington, I feel, is the greatest because he was the first.
But set a great example.
Abraham Lincoln had the amount of responsibility and weight on his shoulders, trying to hold this country together, and think of the anger we have amongst ourselves now and trying to discuss stuff. Well, when we take up arms and we go to war in a tremendous, brutal way that was happening back then, he had a huge responsibility to hold the country together, and I would say he pulled it off, right? And so he's probably my favorite, in addition to George Washington and then Abe Lincoln. And I'm also, real quick, last one for me, just highlights. I was a young high school person in the 80s, and Ronald Reagan had come in behind Jimmy Carter. I remember Jimmy Carter's inauguration. I remember the Ford-Carter debate and how everyone flocked to Jimmy Carter. And then I saw 4 years, and as a kid, I just took it in and observed. And then I saw Ronald Reagan come in. We had this Iran hostage crisis under Carter that went on for, I don't know, a year, I guess, or close to it. I don't remember.
I'm not really familiar with that.
100 days, or I can't remember. And with our podcast, as just to reiterate, we're not trying to show the world that we're experts, or I'm not trying to show anybody that I'm an expert. I'm just voicing my opinion and where I see things.
This is a fact check free podcast. No, it's all fake news.
Reagan came in, and I just saw and felt the country had like a breath of fresh air, and we rose to a higher level. And I attribute Ronald Reagan and Republican ideals to ultimately winning the Cold War against the Soviet Union. They were the big threat at the time. China was nothing anywhere near the threat that they are today, as far as their ability.
Right, the world powers, yeah.
They've gotten so much money, largely from, I don't want to
us shipping off our economy to be built over there.
Doing business with China. And we talked about this at last podcast, but so I would say those guys are the top of mind. Truman, Washington, Truman, Lincoln, Reagan.
Yeah, so Reagan's an interesting one. I do have him on my notes as, I think, an overrated president. And
Ronald Reagan?
Yeah, and I do revere his ability from like an orator perspective. I think he was a great communicator, probably one of the greatest and arguably the greatest communicator to ever serve this, the presidential office. But I do think there are, again, some questionable decisions. Again, no one bats 1,000. I think the very clear one that I've became aware of over the last couple of years was giving the pharmaceutical companies immunity to being sued for developing vaccines. Because like any other drug, right, vaccines can have side effects on people, and it could be 1 in a million, right? But why is it not okay to, talk about that? Where every other prescription medication that gets advertised on TV, which again, the cliche, we're one of the only 2 countries to even allow that. But when you advertise vaccines, there's no talk about side effects may include nausea or fever or even including death. And
that is 0.001% chance of death if you take this
right.
vaccine.
Or it could be 1% or 2%, or it could be your 0.0000. Right. But why can that not be talked about and
and given the same weight as an over-the-counter drug that you have,
which we all recognize as having these risks, as minuscule as they may be, right? And so I think he had a large hand to play in, kind of the merger of especially, the mainstream media and the pharmaceutical companies that we really saw become problematic, especially over the last 2 election cycles. But I mean, you can argue, again, that goes all the way back to Ronald Reagan and, even during the Bush and Obama administrations, we had the big opioid crisis. That was a problem because of the doctors over-prescribing. And I know a lot of that stemmed out, from Florida and wasn't necessarily, it was a federal problem, but like it was stemming more so a lot from Florida and then just making its way up through all the other states. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that as much, but it's really interesting that you could basically just go from doctor's office to doctor's office in Florida because there's no state records, where a lot of other states, as I've understood it, had records at least within that state, but you could go out of state to other doctors and get prescriptions. In Florida, you could just go from office to office to office to office.
So I'm wondering if people like that lived in on the border areas, like Georgia, Florida, that
well, even the ones that didn't live on the border, that they would just work with people to traffic it to other states.
So more addicts in Florida, you're saying, right?
Well, and a lot of like the supply was coming from Florida, but then the demand was everywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a lot of that could stem back to Ronald Reagan and just like the interdependence on the pharmaceutical companies and, basically giving them not free advertising with the mainstream media, but, there's a lot more weight where mainstream media used to just take it at face value, or a lot of people did, if it's being reported by ABC, Fox, NBC, whatever the case may be. This is the news, and it might be a little biased, but it's going to be, in our best interest by and large. And I think that's been not necessarily proven to not be the case in a lot of situations, but I know that was also under Obama's administration that there used to be legislation. I don't know exactly what the format was and exactly what all the wording was, but media companies used to not be able to propagandize, and there used to be a risk of liability for speaking out falsehoods, right? Peddling untrue narratives. And I remember there's a case of like an airliner that went down, and like there's a news agency, I think even including like the Wall Street Journal or like some, fairly well-respected news organization reporting like the pilots' names like Bang Dang Ow and Holy Fook and, like a bunch of, and it's like this was reported on, live TV. And I think there was like the case being made under the Obama administration that, hey, well, we don't want these media companies getting sued if they do get it wrong, but it kind of gave them the ability to purposely get information wrong and, to fit their narrative, so to speak.
Yeah. Maybe to sell a story and to get eyeballs, viewership to
make it more entertainment, less.
Yeah. And again, like what we've talked about before, it's not necessarily what you say that worries me, it's what you're leaving out.
Right.
So it's you present a side to a story, a media story, and if you leave out pertinent things,
that's not telling the truth.
It paints a false, or it creates a narrative or whatever that could be that's not totally accurate. Shame on the media for doing. They've been doing that, I feel, for a long time.
And that's where the oath going into public office is I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, right? Because you can tell the truth and it's not, but you're leaving out pertinent information. So it's basically lying by omission, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's the case, a lot of times the media, like I mentioned, watching the NBC Meet the Press, all the weeks prior. I did actually watch it yesterday's episode because Kristen Welker was interviewing Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president.
Right.
And I don't want to get too much into that conflict right now. Hopefully, of course, it's coming to an end, but it is just interesting to see how much you'll get clips that are like, they to me seemingly are like purposely misinterpreting or misconstruing, what actually happened to peddle a narrative that, gets a lot of people, up in arms about, in this case, the current administration.
Yeah. And just real quick, stepping aside and making a quick comment.
Yeah.
Isn't it refreshing to see something actually being done to end that debacle over there? We haven't seen this kind of humanity acting this way in Western civilization. Really, I would say since World War II, and I know there was that period of Soviet aggression, in the beginning of the Cold War where they took control of Eastern Europe, and there was some death and whatnot. But it's just so pathetic. I mean, I don't know I'm sure at least 1 million lives have been lost now. And think of the billions and billions and billions of dollars of damage that's going to cost somebody's going to pay for that.
Right.
And so it's so
and those lives could have generated, right? If they were left to their own devices to build businesses, work jobs, and not have to go kill one another. Yeah. I mean, wow, that sounds pretty great to me.
Man, I tell you, and yet we're seeing action being taken by our country at least. And we're supposed to be a serious world leader and representative of democracy and freedom. And we're trying to end this war. I hope that they succeed. And it's good to see the efforts, what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, we got to spend, I forget how many $1 million it was. I think it was in the neighborhood of $20 million, $21 million, something like that. Within the year or year and a half of the Ukraine-Russia war really breaking out back, what was it, February 2022, was it? Or was it February 23? In any case, USAID, part of that funding, that Doge uncovered, went to getting this group of Ukrainian supermodels over to Paris Fashion Week. And it's like, that sounds to me, and like this wasn't what was said after the fact, but to me, that sounds like a great way to get a bunch of Ukrainian men, interested in signing up for enlisting right for the front lines. Hey, imagine if I can be one of these great war heroes. I can end up with one of our homegrown Ukrainian models, right?
They're beautiful women.
Yeah. And again, that might not be the actual motive, but like, why are we, getting these Ukrainian women over to Paris Fashion Week. Is that really the support that they need?
Now, you saw that on the Doge website?
That was in one of the live press conferences that
Right.
I cannot recommend this enough to people. Forbes Breaking News on YouTube just releases the press conferences, the congressional hearings, all of these news events, and there's no reporter speaking over it. It's no like you're in the newsroom with an anchor and then jumping to the clip. You are just seeing the live,
Yep.
3 hours, 2 hours, 30 minutes, whatever the case may be, and you get to make up your own mind, right?
Yeah.
And I have found that has been incredible to, watch over the last year and a half.
I think in history that's called, what is it called? Core research or core issue.
Primary.
It's your primary,
Primary source. Yeah.
And you go there and you don't have someone interpret it for you
Right.
to tell you how to think about it, right?
Like us.
Kind of like what we're doing, but what we're doing is on so much of a smaller scale.
Yeah.
Versus a media company that has so much money and has responsibility to their advertisers, right? To spin a narrative and spin a story. See, I think all this, and we're segueing away from.
No, this is great though.
We're just, this is a free kind of a.
We're doing the weave.
Yeah, we're doing in jazz the improvisational part of the tune where we're just seeing what happens and
We're
go
like
with
fish.
it. Swimming wherever we want. But I've always said this, man. At the end of the day, I feel that the real problem, or with the tension between Republican, right, left, Democrat, Republican, right, left, whatever, it comes down to money. Yeah. It's really about and
that's the same with race. It's more of a class issue.
I think it's used. Yeah. It's used by these forces to divide and to allow them
and
to
keep them in power, right? If it's a 50-50 shot for them, that's a lot better than it being divided into many different parties, or as I would like it, a free-for-all. And hey, if you're the best person for office, represent the ideas that you like and you think others will like, but not because you're doing them for other people. It just so happens it's what's best for you also happens to help other people.
Yeah.
But that's selfish in a lot of people's eyes, which I think is very counterintuitive. It's like, how are you going to say you're speaking on behalf of thousands or hundreds or really a whole group of people, like on behalf of women or on behalf of the black community or whatever? It's like, are you saying all women think like you or all like black people think like you? Like that is the most disingenuous, sort of position that I feel like so many people like to take, right? And use that as a strong arm.
Just because someone is gay, for example, then they have to line up with the LGBTQ agendas.
Right.
And there might be some things in that agenda that they disagree with, but they can't really speak out, or they might get, thrown out of the club or whatever. So they, I agree with that. And they just get in line. And that's dangerous, I feel. And that's kind of, I think, what you're saying too.
Well, yeah. And from like a political standpoint, people will jump in a camp and then, what they think about as a Democrat is completely different in someone else's eyes that also thinks they're a Democrat, right? And, again, these words just kind of get co-opted into something they're not, but it makes people feel good about being on a team, a tribe, and
being a part.
Being a part of something greater than themselves, which I think is one of really the biggest problems that we have more than ever in America is just a lack of purpose. And I was watching a great podcast about this guy. He works with like Boys and Men of America, like a nonprofit organization where, and I was like, oh, come on, cry me a river. Like, you just need to like pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That's what more people need, the self-responsibility sort of message. But he was talking about from an interesting angle over the last really couple decades or so, we've seen all of like this correction from, women being oppressed, people of color being oppressed, all these different, victimhood and like all these different groups being oppressed, but no one's like been, advocating for, men, right? And specifically, I don't know if he ever used white men, but, young men, essentially. It's like you're almost like a forgotten group. And, this kind of correction of the oppression of, yesteryear, so to speak, we've gone too far. The pendulum has swung too far in the other direction to where, now you're, I think, again, Theo Vaughn, the guy that he was talking to, put it in a great way that if you're like a white male in today's society and you haven't achieved some sort of great success, it's like you're almost looked at more of a loser because it's like, man, you had it all and like you
were privileged.
Yeah.
You had such a head start over everybody else.
Right.
Is the thought or the belief.
Right.
Some people do. Some white guys do have a head start,
But it's not the color of their skin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know who I think you should, and to our viewers out there who are enjoying this kind of mentality and thought, have you ever read and gotten into Ayn Rand?
I've gotten into her, like some long form reviews, and I think I listened to the audio book of Atlas Shrugged. I don't think I read it. Or I might have gone back and forth between reading it but it's been quite a while, 6-7 years.
I'm in the same boat. I've never read Atlas Shrugged all the way through, but I've read pieces of it. And there's a really cool interview with the late 60 Minutes founder, Mike Wallace.
I did watch that one.
Yeah, he's smoking a cigarette. It's black and white, and Ayn Rand is there. She's Russian, right?
Yep.
And he's interviewing her and getting her thoughts, and she is unabashedly, is that a right word?
Yeah,
she is
absolutely
unashamed,
unapologetic.
She came from the Soviet Union or from Eastern Europe in the Russian area, and she is not at all ashamed to say, no, I'm in this, and really, all of us are really in this for ourselves.
Yep.
And you're not selfish for wanting to pull yourself up and advance. You can help others along the way, but she had a big problem with the false narrative, and this kind of reminds me of Elon Musk as well. His stance on this of the social justice warriors out there who claim to we want to see all these underprivileged people or whatnot rise up, but in the meantime they continue with their stock investments and they continue taking care of business, taking care of themselves. So there's so much hypocrisy. I'm kind of rambling.
No.
Ayn Rand is a person I would think that you would really relate well with.
Yeah, we just need to revive her from the dead and come ask her to join us in conversation.
I don't know when she died. I think in like the 70s.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, she's interesting. But going back to, and she's talked about the even more traditional gender roles, thinking how, I don't think she was necessarily like anti-women having rights. I'm not trying to say that, but she was very like, what's wrong, having a man that you have a relationship with, and, it's more traditional in the way that he takes care of you, where versus now there's a lot of, we want to give women equal opportunity, but it's at a point where men aren't as needed as much in modern society, right? And it's always been this case to some degree that it's like a winners take all sort of society where, it's like the kings, they always have a harem of wives, and now it's like the 1%, like the Elon Musk, I think, just in social media, right? He came out with his 13th kid with like the 4th baby mama, something like that. And in a time where women don't perceive the need to be with a man because there's so much economic opportunity for them to take care of themselves. Well, why am I going to settle nowadays where that used to not be considered settling? It's just like, this is going to be a great way to a prosperous life with, children that, I could take care of, love, still work and, have a career. But it's...
And I want, so many people on the left especially hate Elon Musk, and a lot of women that I have acquaintances, friends who are left, despise him. I wonder if that's one of the reasons why deep down, here's that hypocrisy thing again. Yes, we want to be.
It's not doing.
We want to be liberated and be free to do. And then here's Elon Musk with children outside of a traditional marriage,
or wedlock. Yeah,
and it may very well be that is one of the core reasons that so many people, especially I would say women, maybe hate him. Especially women on the left. I don't know.
So I think he's been married a couple times, and there's the cliche for men in his position, with more wealth to get a prenup, and I don't know if that's I don't know if that's been the case with him, but what I have heard, and again could be fake news propaganda, that he's had agreements with the women that he's with or women that he is with. As long as they're with him, he'll pay for everything. But he, keeps everything, with receipts. And so if they leave him, here's all of your receipts and you owe me $13 million or seven, whatever the case may be. So it's one of those golden handcuffs. It's like, hey, I may not, I don't want to say that because I don't know any of these women, but like, I may not love this guy the most, but those golden handcuffs sure are nice. Yeah.
You're sticking around.
Right. But something else that the whole conversation around Ronald Reagan and Rand kind of sparked is the Cold War conflict that, Ronald Reagan really kind of brought us out of, to your point, was leading up to that was just kind of instilling the ideals for what it means to be an American, what it means to, have a picturesque American family, right? The suburban neighborhoods, like you live in, a nice suburban neighborhood, like the white picket fence, you get married, you go to church. And I know that was, something that I've had a problem with, where, we've always been told that there should be a separation between church and state. And yet on our coins, "In God We Trust," and our Pledge of Allegiance, that's actually, if anyone has taken note of me doing the Pledge of Allegiance, I always go silent, "Under God."
Really?
Yeah. I say it out loud. Everything else I say out loud.
I hear you.
Yeah.
You know that was added, that phrase,
in the 50s,
it was added under Eisenhower's.
Yep.
We'll talk about presidents here.
Absolutely.
And it was because, it's my understanding, it was because of the big red menace,
yes,
the communist threat.
Yep.
Because in Soviet Russia, they and the Communist Manifesto turns its thumbs down against religion,
yep,
because that helps create classes,
right,
with churches and what. So they want a classless society. I've been watching a lot of Third Reich stuff lately because I love the World War II history, and I watched a speech, just a clip, footage. Adolf Hitler is addressing. This is probably being like 36 or 37.
Wait, who? No.
The war may have started, but he was addressing the Hitler Youth,
yep,
and they had a massive Hitler Youth rally. And he says in that rally, "We want one class. We don't. Our goal, yep, is to abolish the classes, and you all are all a part of Greater Germany, the fatherland, and your being belongs to the state." National Socialism, right? There's the personal rights are, yep, set aside, and everything.
More collectivism.
Everything is focused on the state, and you're supposed to give your all to the state to make the state greater and to benefit everyone, right?
Right.
Share the wealth and whatnot, and that's part of the evils of socialism, and why I feel so strongly, with my limited knowledge, I feel so strongly against socialism. Sounds good on the surface, but it will fail in the long run.
Yeah. No, I mean, for what it matters, I agree with you in that case, and I think Kamala Harris, was campaigning on the platform of equal outcome, essentially, and it's like equity, I think, or equality of equity, and instead of equality of opportunity, but basically saying that everyone needs to be given the same starting line in life. And, that goes totally against one of the cliches I like to live by. You don't get to choose where you start off in life, but you can have at least a lot more of a say of where you end up in life.
Absolutely. And if you make the right decisions coming along, and you bring someone into this world, and you're responsible as an adult, and you let that be a part of your decision to bring a child into the world, where you bring a child in and you give them a fighting chance.
Right.
But when you're whacked out on crack cocaine, or you have no job and you're living in poverty and whatnot, you don't have any business bringing a kid into this world. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
And I feel like more people ought to have that opinion. I mean, why bring a life into the world when they don't have a chance,
But sometimes that's sometimes how you get the diamond in the rough sort of situation, and that's where
I think those are diamonds in a rough. They're great stories.
Right.
J.D. Vance, his mother
it's the exception, not the rule.
It's the exception, not the rule. And so you do have these massive success stories with this. But there's a whole bunch of failures, and the ratio of people that start out without a chance and don't go anywhere to ones that start out without a chance and rise to something great, man, the scale's massively tilted. So, I mean,
it is, but that actually goes back to how I feel about abortion, which I know is a very touchy subject, but to me, why are we going to deprive this human being of a life that they can, make out of it what they will versus never giving them that opportunity to begin with? And that's where, like, I feel like most people that, come up in like educated society, think, oh yeah, my body, my choice, freedom of choice. And then I started to think about it more, and really, I told you this somewhat recently. There's an upcoming town hall with Rich McCormick, our congressman. I went to a previous town hall with one of our state senators, Greg Dolezal, who I met out campaigning, and I forgot if that was before or after this town hall, that he was giving his take on abortion based off of a question in the audience. And that was the first eloquent take of, pro-life that really started to think, oh yeah, like how could you argue against that? Where he was saying, if you just give this, this embryo, right, enough time and, the nourishment that you would, like, it's going to become a baby, a human, right? It's not like it's going to become, I know our producer has talked about, like, it's not going to become a dolphin. It's not going to become a donkey. It's not going to be like, let's not like pretend that this isn't at least pre-human life, but like it's life, right? And I think the easy way of thinking about it for most people that I've never heard a coherent or cogent argument against that. We all agree that you shouldn't smoke cigarettes or drink alcohol as a pregnant woman. And it's actually, again, our producer let me know this, it's actually illegal to drink alcohol as a pregnant woman. And that's because it is another life in there. It's not just your life that you're taking care of. And so it's okay to
like drinking and driving.
Yeah. And so it's okay to literally kill that life. But
but to endanger that life,
is against the law, right? And so I just find like let's argue that point, and whatever conclusion that we come out to, I'm fine with that. But let's not like play pretend like this is okay, but this isn't, and yet they're very contradictory in nature.
Yeah.
But
so, in your opinion, to be honest across the board, pregnant women should be able to drink alcohol and smoke if they want. It should be their choice.
That's not my choice to decide. I think that's all of our choice to, be up for vote. And then, hopefully our represented officials agree with our votes in each of our districts. And that's the way I think it should be, right? Because I don't think I'm like unilaterally equipped to, make that decision. So, I mean, I personally, follow like I think, and I know they've been accused of flip-flopping, but from what I've heard, the specific stance of like Robert Kennedy Jr., Donald Trump, like every abortion is a travesty, and I don't think we should be promoting abortions as a form of birth control in a way that. I'm not saying they're often treated, but there are some parts of this country, like I've heard Harlem in particular, like some crazy statistic, which I typically hate like referencing, but some ungodly amount of pregnancies end up being aborted there. I mean, it's unreal. And I think, that's like we need to get to the root of that abortion problem, like just making it illegal or not, that's... I wouldn't even call that a Band-Aid, Yeah. So it's not an easy answer.
Yeah, and so many of these social problems, let's talk gun violence, right? Yeah. We spend all our time talking about how can we stop this? Well, and I don't want to get necessarily into a gun control debate, but it's gun control or not. We got to. And my underlying question is, why is this happening? There are issues underneath it. And so I think addressing the issue as to why it's happening versus how can we lessen it, when it's still going to – it's an indictment on our culture too, man. I mean, I don't know what the abortion rates are in other countries. I'm sure some are higher than us and some are probably much lower than us.
Yeah, and we have more gun attacks than elsewhere. We don't have the same sort of like knife attacks and acid attacks and, some other very atrocious acts of violence.
Acid attacks?
Literally, vats of acid. Like that's common over in like the UK, I've heard quite commonly. And I mean, Then you go over to a place like South Africa, they don't have the same, gun, problem that we have, at least as propagated in the news. But I think depending on like the person, I've seen like a Vice News piece about the assassin, economy over there. And there's literally an economy around assassinations that you could pay.
This is in Europe?
South Africa.
I can imagine.
And it's like
can make
$5, $50, $500, literally to take someone's life.
Yeah.
That is nuts. And it's like, as bad as it's awful. We had it here in Georgia, right? Up in like Brazelton, in the district of the mayor that I know, that school shooting, right? This past fall, shortly before the election, right? And obviously no one ever wants to see one of those news clips. But to your point, taking away guns that lawful citizens have isn't going to be the problem, and you're not going to keep guns out of the hands of unlawful citizens or otherwise.
Yeah. And with our country being, I would say, founded with firearms and the freedom.
The Minutemen, literally giving us this country, fighting for this country.
The Wild West, and think of guns are a part of the culture here, and there's so many. I think your dad made the interesting comment that if any, and I may have said this already once before, but any crazy terrorist group or any country or military group that would try to invade and literally take over our country,
good luck.
They're going to have to face all the weapons that we already have here from a ground perspective.
Right.
So, and that's a kind of a.
But no, I
kind of a base argument, but it does.
I echoed
sense.
The same sentiment with drones, right? You layer that on top of drones, and again, if we were to get invaded, I think that sentiment held true up until even now. But let's say China was able to get within 1,000 miles, a few hundred miles of our shore, and they could launch some aircraft that could then come even closer and start deploying drones in the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions. Good luck even with a civilian populace that is armed with guns, in the way that we are. I really think that we do have to start looking at even like those consumer flying camera drones as weapons, covered within the Second Amendment. Because again, those just flying camera drones are the ones that we are being seen used in very effectively in modern warfare, like in the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
Quick, since you brought up drones, and you own Drones I View, and it's iView Media. Drones I View.
Yes.
What is the parent company? What's the big parent? Is it?
Yeah. So I started the company as Drones I View, which you had right. And the legal business name is Drones I View Incorporated. Okay. So we started as an LLC. Then when we brought in an investor, he wanted us to actually incorporate to bring in more sophisticated investors.
Drones I View Incorporated.
That's the parent company.
Includes iView Media.
And then iView Robotics, which is our hardware division that actually makes the drones. And those are really like two separate business units. They're really two divisions. They operate separately, but right now, all of like our revenue still just comes through one independent entity, right? Just because then we don't have to like double up the accounting and all like the G&A sort of operations, I'm
waiting one day to hear Drones I View Defense, where you're creating drones or some component, some facet for military use.
I think that could be
a government contract.
I think that could be a subset of iView Robotics. I mean, when we first started developing our first drone back in this was March of 2019. Like we literally hit the drawing board. And then by the end of the year, we submitted for an Air Force contract, didn't get it, got some great feedback. And then similarly, June, I think, of 2020, we submitted for our second government contract. Similarly, didn't get it, but they basically said, we love the product, we love your team, we love like everything about this, but we want to see this already commercialized, and then we want to be able to adapt it to military use. But in my eyes, and what I've always been told, and what I've always understood, is the Small Business Innovation Research Program, the SBIR program, is to help you to basically commercialize your research in the form of the military or another government agency adopting it, and then testing it, becoming your first customer, allowing you to then spin it out to the larger consumer commercial market. And so went in with that. And I think that is the way that it works for a lot of companies, but it is like any other business. It's the who you know versus the what you know, oftentimes. And we did have a couple people that looked over our proposals, and a couple guys that were both ex-military on ours, but just didn't have like the right person that's reviewing the contract, or, you know, knowing the person that's reviewing the contract or the proposal. So I think it will make sense for us to be producing drones that are used within the military, or at least by our government. But going at it like from more like the consumer approach that I was talking about, Microsoft, you know, making Microsoft Office more so as a consumer commercial product. And then it's just so easy to use that, of course, the government's going to use it for all their paper pushers, their soldiers, whoever needs to, you know, use productivity software like that, right?
And I went onto this because of something that you were just saying about like the Chinese, let's say, with the ability to
send swarms of drones.
So are you saying now this is the visionary thing, looking in the future? And you know, we had said, I think at the last podcast, about how military use of these drones it's already here, and we're seeing it, and it has been here for a while, right? It's only getting more. It's only going to go up as far as, you know, technology and capabilities and breadth of capabilities and all these things. Do you actually foresee in the future where, you know, troops are going to be attacked by the individual drones are going to be the things that are going to be used?
That's literally what's happening.
That's what's happening now. Yeah. I know there are big drones that can deliver payload onto a target.
But again, a lot of like in Ukraine, the Russia war, you see, unfortunately, I've seen more than I would like to, is you see like these kamikaze drones, and they're like either piloted, or some of them even have AI where they can detect people and
they fly into them and blow up.
And so some of those are kamikaze drones, and they're like the racing drones that hobbyists, you know, use the little goggles with, and they'll fly those from a few miles away. Some of them are even the internet or satellite communications oriented drones, so they can be hundreds or thousands of miles away in some cases. But a lot of the most common drones are literally just the consumer drones, flying camera drones, and they have just enough customization to it where you can like program a button on the controller to release a release mechanism. And so they're really not meant to be equipped with like release mechanisms, but they just barely have that ability to be able to attach one and then press a button on the controller to then, you know, drop a grenade or whatever explosive. And so you talk about like the progression of these military super complex drones, but there's really not, I mean, obviously there's like the Predator drones that we've heard about like being used overseas, the Guardian, which is our more domestic version that's not weaponized but still large military grade drone. Like, of course, those are still going to continue progressing, continue replacing more like the fighter pilot bomber roles, you know, the more traditional manned aviation roles. But the smaller drones that are being used by the ground soldiers or replacing the ground soldiers in some cases, that's by and large just going to be the same as the consumer commercial technology. And then it may be just weaponized. But by and large, I don't think there's this huge delineation between the military, like small drone technology, and the consumer drone technology.
See, I would think that there would be. I would think that we'll see a whole new, just like, think of aircraft and compare the, what is the F-22 Raptor, I think is the most advanced. It's probably, $250 million aircraft. My oldest brother, who was an F-15 fighter pilot for 20 years, he said the F-22 is, quote unquote, going to rule the skies as far as its ability as an air superiority fighter, right? And bomber too, I think. But so, you know, compare that with civilian use of aircraft. It's totally, you know, in totally different worlds. I would think that in military, can you not foresee like a mothership drone cruising at 20,000 feet with massive camera ability, sees enemies, and then it drops small killer bee kamikaze drones that go down. So
that's why
one of those mothership drones might be able to take out no telling how many targets.
And it doesn't even have to be a drone. Again, to the point of saving human lives, it's probably better using a mothership drone versus a mothership manned aircraft. But that's what I was theorizing would be a possibility for that. Remember the weather balloon that we had come through a year and a half ago? So I literally just saw a post about it again this morning, 2 years later, that they just recovered it, and that they did find that there's some communications, but apparently it was like just broadcast, or like it was just receiving information, but it wasn't broadcasting it back to China, supposedly. But my thought was, what if this is an experiment to see how far they could get a balloon of this size over the mainland, to where they could, deploy a swarm of drones over, the mainland, right? And I do think that is a very real possibility, right? I mean, you get a balloon that doesn't take any fuel, any like battery power to, get hundreds, thousands of miles away, more or less to where you want it to be. It's not the most targeted attack system like we saw it in Japan's efforts, back in World War II. But I think there is a very real viability. Let's release 1,000 of these balloons, heading over the Pacific, over the West Coast into the United States. And, they may get 50 of them. They may get 100 of them. They may get 990 of the 1,000 of them. But if each of those, 1,000 balloons has 100 or, 1,000 of those small drones,
it's a lot of firepower.
Yeah, right.
Japan in the Second World War, kind of as a last-ditch effort, how Nazi Germany went to the buzz bomb and the V-1 rocket, these rockets that they were shooting over into London and Great Britain. Japan tried something, but theirs was a little more kitschy. Theirs was a little more down to earth, a little more folk. They had a series of balloons, and they based them on weather patterns, and they released them from Japan. And the idea was they would fly over, get over North America, and then by that time they would be at an altitude where they would pop.
Yep.
And then
it
would drop, balloons, and it would create fires and chaos. And I learned that I took a Canadian history course, University of South Carolina, and some of those balloons were found in Canada and were on display. It's pretty weird. Anyway.
Yeah, those Canadians like to take a lot of credit, like that they won the War of 1812. But
what do you think about this? Let's just go political real quick.
Yeah.
Let me, if you don't mind.
Where have we been?
Trump's comments about Canada becoming the 51st state.
Again, realistically, right? I think it would have to be broken up into many states. I think we've talked about that a little bit before, but I'm not opposed to the idea, right? Of course, I don't think
you might not be opposed, but my thought is, from what I know about Canadian history and the Canadian people, I've talked to several of them, and Trudeau sent a tweet back after this came out, and he said, quote, "There isn't a snowball's chance in hell that Canada wants or will become," I may not have that exactly right, but he did say there's not a snowball chance in hell that Canada is going to become part of the United States. They cannot stand the United States.
They think they get a say?
Of course, Trump's comments that they're being subsidized, right? And
let's take back all of our industry that we were letting you take on, and
we'll see how things progress.
No, I do think that would be, of course, it could be beneficial to the United States. I think, again, the assimilation could be a problem, like you see in many cases of, not that Canada and the United States have drastically different cultures, but again, there are cultural differences, just like we have people divided within our own borders, that would add to the divisiveness, because there is a non-zero, and you could even say a majority of the Canadian population that wouldn't want to come into the United States. I have heard from predominantly podcasts from Canadian people that there are some, non-zero group that would like the idea, and because think about, a lot of the Canadians that want to do business or do business in the United States, how much more open that becomes, right? Now you're no longer having to get a passport to go to Niagara Falls. The only thing that's probably worthwhile to go see in Canada. But
okay,
but
we're gonna get a knock on the door, and there's this guy's gonna go, "Hey, I heard what you said. I'm gonna kick your ass now,
and then apologize about it, I want a little
Canada
Australian
it's
there.
a cool place. Montreal, I've been to Montreal. And
never been. Yeah.
It's, I think, if I'm not
most European city in North America.
I think it's the oldest city. Is that right? It's one of the oldest cities in North America.
Won't surprise me. That or like some
This dates
Floridian city that was like settled by the Spanish, or maybe even
French,
in the West. There are some Russian territories and cities, and even Spanish cities out there. But
yeah, I mean, it's a different place, and I love the fact that you go up to Canada and you are in a foreign country, and want to see different cultures and different.
Dollar goes a lot further.
Yeah. And I think that they don't want to see. They don't want their country to become a country of fast food restaurants. And
I mean, that's too late. But no, I think they want to keep their
identity.
Their identity. Their sovereign, like their sovereign. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
and
French Quebec is so adamant that they were founded by the French, and they want to stay French, and that's why they have the the language patrol. And if you have a business in Quebec. I think this is across the entire province that the French language dominates over English.
Yep.
So if you have a sign, it's in French. It can have English underneath it, but it's got to be subdued. It can't be the other way around, or you pay a fine.
Yeah, what's interesting? I mean, getting off like all the presidential aspects of this, but or the political aspects. People find it weird that, my grandmother, my late grandmother that was married to my grandfather that you've met, my dad's dad, she was born in the United States. I think her parents were also born in the United States, but lived in Canada for quite a while, but then moved back. But their parents were still in Canada.
And they were French, right? Was their native tongue French?
So, yeah, she was...
Your grandmother's name was...
Judith.
That's right, Judith.
Yeah, or Judy. Yeah, Judy.
Judy, that's right,
yeah. So she was raised in the United States in New Hampshire, and her first language was French, went to all French-speaking schools in the United States, and that's just something that you don't really hear of. Yeah. Like, you might hear, oh, yeah, I go to an international school, and, that's why you speak a different language, or, you might be in an area that, has Spanish, heritage, especially down south, probably more in Texas than anywhere around here in Georgia. But it's very odd for a lot of people to hear, wow, you could have French as your first language and, go to school and French be your first language in the United States. I don't know if that's still the case really much, if anywhere now, but that was the case for her growing up. And I always thought that was pretty interesting.
Very interesting. I know your dad, I've heard him say that he regretted not teaching you guys French, because he speaks some French.
It's going to die with him. Yep. In our family. Yep.
Yeah. So.
And my brother,
how do you feel about that? Do you wish that you could? Would you like to be fluent in French?
Yeah.
I think it would open up a whole nother world for you. And what they say when you start to learn a foreign language, it's like you have to grow up all over again.
Yeah.
Because you start like a child, right? You learn your ABCs, your alphabet, and then you have to be helped along, and you make an ass out of yourself. You say things that are foolish.
Yep.
Same is true with music. When you learn a musical instrument or learn a style of music, it's a language, right?
Right.
So when you first start out and you're learning, you sound funny, and you sound, you're
right. Yeah, you're stumbling. Right. Yeah, you're learning how to walk again. Yeah.
Yeah. So you would if you had your way, I mean, you would enjoy being bilateral.
Yeah, for sure.
Or bilingual,
but it would have taken a real concerted effort, and I don't want to put that on him, because I really think back, I mean, from like an activeness standpoint, like being in my life growing up, I mean, he was about as proactive as you could have asked as a father. Like, just thinking about like him being as proactive as he was, as well as like a large part, he was working full time than my entire childhood, right? And then
has that changed?
Yeah.
He's working, always involved in something.
But then coaching soccer, and that was just thinking about how much that's a commitment that he took on, showing up to all those practices, showing up to all those games. And then it wasn't, just my practices for a while. Then it was also my brother's. And then he also coached another soccer team for, family friends that really enjoyed him as a coach, until we really all became way too PC. And then his antics, if you will, did not fly for most parents anymore. But it was crazy. That for me was one of the turning moments that I got to see, our culture shift that we've went through over the last couple of decades. And the other one was, again, really just like the helicopter parenting, where, again, my parents, of course, like really cared about me, and they didn't want to see me, go get nabbed by, a random dude or whatever in a van, that shows up in or around the neighborhood. But we still had some more freedom to go like live a life without constantly being under their surveillance.
Right.
And the kids like that grew up like while I was in middle school and they were in elementary school, or I was in high school, they were in middle school. Like they didn't, by and large, get that same level of freedom to where we could go roam our neighborhood. It's a pretty big neighborhood, like 600 or so houses, actually between the two neighborhoods connected. And that was like, by and large, for us to free roam. You hear the whistle or whatever. If we're out of friends, they might get a call, time to come home for dinner. But really just for like the kids like just below me growing up, it was, you cannot go past this mailbox like 3 houses down the road,
wow.
4 houses down the road, like the cul-de-sac, the 2 cul-de-sacs. And then it's like, well, you want your kid to, well, maybe they didn't. You want your kid to go outside and, not be behind a computer or a video game console all day. But what other choice do they have if you live in suburbia, but they can't even go 4 houses down the road, right? Out of your sight. So I think that's been where there's a little bit of a culture shift that I've, seen apparent. And that's beyond, well, I guess has something to do with the technology, because I remember like it just wasn't an option to, give my brother and I a phone in the way that you can now, and just have like, even if you didn't have a data plan, hey, you're going over to friends, you have Wi-Fi and you'll be able to like FaceTime or, do the audio calls or whatever. We had walkie-talkies, and then my grandmother that I was just mentioning, she got us my brother and I track phones, where you have like the pay as you go, like pay for the minutes. And back when you also had to pay the 10 cents or whatever for text message. So she would get us like these $25, cards that
$25 worth of communication time.
Yeah, perfectly said. And that was the way that we could, like, if my grandparents wanted to call back when we still had a home phone. I don't know if that's something that you have still, but yeah.
No.
It's been, yeah.
Actually, I do have a landline, because I still have I have a home alarm system. So.
Okay, and that's tied together.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, because we were, for the longest time, I feel like one of the households to stick with a home phone, besides like my grandparents, because yeah, they lived in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas, where you could still call everyone with 7 digits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the kitchen back in the day, there was a phone that would hang on the wall, and it had a real long cord.
Yep.
So you could take it off and walk across,
through the
like
kitchen.
Your mom could walk across the kitchen with it, and the cord was like, it would stretch to be like 20 feet.
Yep.
Had this long ass cord that would hang down, and it would stretch. Boy, those days, wow. I saw online a YouTube thing. Some parents set a rotary phone in front of a little kid and said, "Can you tell us what this is?" And he looked at it and didn't know what it was. And they said, well, they showed him that it was a phone. They said, so how would you call somebody? And he put his fingers in the holes and pushed. He didn't know about the rotary thing, and that really brought it home. You don't remember rotary phones, or do you? The old-fashioned.
I've made calls on them, but they were already passed by the time. Like,
man,
we still had corded phones, and then like wireless home phones were pretty much standard as well.
Yeah. But
wait, yeah.
So it would take 5 hours to call somebody, because you'd have to sit there and
wait for the 6 to go all the way back, the 7 to go all the way.
0 was all the way around. It would, anyway.
Let's take a break, and then I definitely have quite a bit more I want to cover once we come back.
Cool.
Nice.
Back to Jake.
All right. So with you just looking at this Washington book a little bit more, you're showing me, I think if I'm educated enough, it's the index, right?
Yep.
And you're showing me all the sources that were used. And that just wanted to bring me back to a segment that I wanted to address with this episode. Some of the other resources I touched briefly on John Adams, that HBO series that touches on his life. But you are familiar with Henry Rollins, is that correct? Yeah. So actually the next recommendation I actually got from him from another podcast. I don't know if it was his only appearance, but maybe his first appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast. Henry Rollins really fascinated me. I have heard of the Black Flag, and I had heard the name before, but I didn't know who he was. And very kind of, I don't even know if I'm using the word correctly, like stoic. Let me do a quick little dictionary search. Yeah, a person who can endure pain or hardship without showing their feelings or complaining. Perfect, I think, for him. And again, from an external perspective, who has only seen him from 2 podcasts, he did a speaking engagement. I think I also saw one of his old concerts that he talked about, someone got up on stage and stabbed him. So of course I, wanted to check that out. I was like, wait, that's pretty crazy. But he's a very, very, very well-read guy. No nonsense. He's committed himself. No more relationships, and he'll listen to a new album every single day, and then meticulously take notes on it. And he's a very kind of samurai-esque, sort of studied man, I guess. But long story short, his recommendation, The Fiery Trial, it's a book about Abraham Lincoln and what he went through both throughout his upbringing, some of the perspective that he had on his father, which he actually kind of empathized, as ridiculous as this may sound, with the slaves of the time, black people, by and large of the time.
Henry's father did? Or
Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh.
And so, this was one of Henry Rollins' book recommendations.
Right,
I'm sorry to clarify. So The Fiery Trial. And what's the subtitle of it? Let me look at this. But in any case, it's a really great look at Abraham Lincoln's life, beyond just, I think, the typical biography. And I don't want to say the author, thinks on behalf of Lincoln, but I mean, to some degree, any historical retrospective, I mean, it's your interpretation of what happened and not really just like we were talking about with that forced breaking news sort of news take, where you're just seeing it is for what it is and not a journalist's interpretation. And unfortunately, with any biography, with any sort of medium that you're looking back in time, you're getting, a portrayal of what actually happened and not what happened, right? But yeah, The Fiery Trial, Abraham Lincoln and American Slavery. And he related to slaves by thinking that he kind of owed his father, for, giving him the life that he did. And much after what little education that he had before he went on to leave the family farm and go start his own law practice, he felt like a huge obligation to, stay at home and take care of a lot of the manual labor. And there is a lot more nuance to it than what I remember, but that was a point that I recall sticking out. And again, as ridiculous as it sounds, relating to that to some degree, as much it's kind of like the golden handcuffs thing, even with Elon Musk, hey, you might have a better situation than most. Again, at that time in the 1800s, no one had it exactly made, or very, 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 very few people in America had it made. Everyone was working for their living by and large at that time. No one just, was living off of, their
Wall Street investments.
Yeah. And
much less.
Yeah. Or there wasn't like the single family income. I mean, it was a single family, income, but I mean, kids, that was still pre-industrialization by and large. We didn't have the child labor laws. So it's like most kids weren't going to school at the time, right? It was like if you came from a good background, you would be going to school, but it might even only be one or two kids of the family that go to school and not all the kids, because you needed hands on the farm back home, right?
That's right, yeah. It was still an agrarian society for a large part.
Yeah. And so basically Abraham Lincoln was just talking about, with those sort of obligations that, pretty much every household in America had, that he couldn't go on to do what he really wanted to do until he kind of served out, his purpose, taking care of his father in the home and kind of paying back, everything that his father provided for him. And again, I'm butchering some of the nuance or, glossing over some of the nuance there, but I think that was a really great recommendation and made me appreciate more of Abraham Lincoln. It's like it humanized him in a way that, again, it's easy to forget about. These figures were actually just individual people like you and I. I mean,
right.
Maybe not like so much you and I, but I mean, realistically, I mean, not so different, right? I mean, I, of course, growing up, again, can't really speak for others, but I, growing up, thought like Theodore Roosevelt in particular as a larger than life figure. I mean, literally, guys like him, or including him, is on like the Mount Rushmore, right? And literally a larger than life figure, right?
Yeah.
And it's easy to forget that they were human, had very human problems. Abraham Lincoln, despite his feelings about like considering himself like a slave to his father, still didn't always, he didn't have the same position on slavery throughout his entire life, right? He went back and forth in some of his writings that, have been examined over time. And I think, again, what's in writing, may not, cover the full nuance of what is going on in that guy's head at the time, right? But just based off of his writings, it's been described that his views have changed over time to where he ultimately stated, to keep this union together, this is something that we're going to have to work past, right?
Yeah. So you're saying that like his initial thoughts on slavery, it evolved. His thoughts and ideas about slavery evolved.
It wasn't even just evolved as much as it kind of like waned back and forth, like teeter-tottered back and forth. Like, is this something that is really going to be essential to like keep this country, together moving forward? Or is this really going to be something that's just kind of kick the can? Like him, many other of the founding fathers kind of just assumed that it would eventually happen, but, kind of like the Truman quote, the buck stops here, right? And I think he really saw it coming to heads, and a lot of that, was out of his control, but he saw that he, could rise to the occasion. And that's in the section that I have, would-be presidents. I almost put him down there, what would have been, a second Abraham Lincoln term. What would have that looked like? Similarly, what would have a second JFK term look like, right? But I actually just noted down Robert Kennedy. Of course, he was assassinated before he had that chance, of course, much like Abraham Lincoln, which I wish I had more time to go through and put more notes together like I wanted to before the show, so I can have more factual information in detail. But there was like 3 or 4 people that worked in the same group as John Wilkes Booth to assassinate not just Abraham Lincoln. Their
Right.
plan was to assassinate the vice president. I don't even remember his name, which is awful, right? Like, and then the third position in office, the
Speaker of the House?
Speaker of the House. Yeah.
I don't remember who these people were either. Bad on me.
And I definitely don't remember. I do recall at one point who the vice president was under Lincoln. But in any case, yeah, there was like a group of 5 or 6 people, and two of them ended up like not doing their part. One, there's a lady that was a part of that group.
She was hanged as well.
Yeah, and she was the first woman to be hung in American history, or the first public hanging of a woman, something like that. Or it might even be the first public execution of a woman in American history, which not something that you're proud to have a first of, but I mean, I guess notable in that sense. And then I guess the other biographies that come to mind, again, I mentioned this previously, Mornings on Horseback, who I think is actually written by David McCullough. Is that his name?
Yep.
Mornings. Yeah, that is indeed the case. That really cemented. I was actually kind of hesitant to go deep dive more into Theodore Roosevelt because I admired him so much, from what little I knew about him really growing up, and what little, again, it's hard to say how much you really know someone just reading about them, especially, 100 plus years removed from that time. But it did give me like a closer connection to him, and again, humanize him more than what I thought about him otherwise, and not in a way that made me think about him as lesser, right? It's not like that cliche, you don't want to meet your heroes because they might not live up to your expectations, but this book actually made me, appreciate him much more than what I already did. And so that's another recommendation I have. And then the other recommendation I have isn't so much a biography of him, but this was also a book I got through a podcast recommendation through Robert Kennedy Jr. himself, JFK and The Unspeakable. And that talks a lot about JFK, his time in office, and specifically the nuance of the Cuban Missile Crisis and his relations with, was it Khrushchev at the time?
Yeah. Nikita Khrushchev.
Yep. And so some of those private letters, like reading what those private letters, contain that, they've since been made public, which, kind of an aside, I think 2,000 documents just got released from the JFK assassination. So be interesting to see what, if anything, comes out of that. But this really paints a great picture. This book paints a great picture of some of the forces at play that weren't the biggest fans of John Kennedy at the time. And especially, his famous saying of breaking up the CIA, scattering them to 1,000 pieces and, into the wind or whatever. That's touched on in this book. And
breaking up the deep state situation.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And no, that was really a large part of his demise, right?
Yeah.
The pulling out of the Vietnam War, and him not sending the armed forces, the Marines or whatever branch it was, into Cuba after he kind of got tricked into. He basically approved a CIA operation in Cuba, and then he got tricked into sending more, they were trying to trick him into sending more boots on the ground. If basically we can commit him to the CIA operation, we know it's not going to go the way that we're telling him it's going to go, and that's going to be an excuse to send in our military. And he was like, nope, we're just going to cut the loss here, and didn't have a lot of fans after that. And so, that would probably be my recommendations if anyone wants to go deeper into these people in particular. But I do have, again, the short list I want to go through. I'd love to get your thoughts on. And, of course, if you have any other presidents that you want to mention, any anecdotes about, I'd love to hear those. But as far as favorite presidents, talked about him quite a bit in this podcast and others now, Teddy Roosevelt. And this is in no particular order, just short list of favorite presidents. George Washington kind of set the standard for not being the king, all those cliches of stepping down after a couple of terms. And even though, he was requested by a lot of people to keep going at it. And I think even after the first term, he did not want to seek re-election. I think that's fairly notable. Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, our latest and greatest, Donald J. Trump, and then Richard Nixon. And again, Donald J. Trump would not be on that list for me if you ask me this time last year or any other time in history, but I have come to appreciate that man so much more than I think I ever thought I would, really. I mean, again, going back to 2016, maybe even earlier, I forgot if this was just before. No, it would have been just after he was elected. So if not late 2016, very early 2017, you're over at the house and having a conversation that I think the best thing that he did for our country, even back then, was showing that anyone in America, despite not being a career politician, could become the U.S. president, at least for this generation. The argument has been made that Ronald Reagan, did that for, your generation or, generations prior to mine, but he still was governor beforehand, right? And Donald Trump held no public office, and you can be an outsider despite, being a very prominent figure in American society. Arguably speaking, he's an outsider, right?
Big time.
Washington outsider, I think it's far less arguable, but, just a political outsider, I still think there's a very good claim to be made there. And then lastly, this again, if you would have asked me maybe like 4, 5, 6 years ago, wouldn't have been on this list, Richard Nixon. And I know very controversial figure in history, much like Donald Trump.
Tricky dick.
Tricky dick. And I was like, and I hear all of this, and I think people they just hear these bite-sized pieces of information about people and then just accept that as fact. And again, I did that, right? And then I go look into more of these figures. I think Watergate is completely overblown, right? I don't think Watergate, at least his involvement, is what people really think it to be. He was never in the original scandal. He was just Watergate was literally, he was just trying to be a part of covering it up, right? And, that's not great, obviously, but in the same way that Joe Biden was impeached, Donald Trump was impeached, Richard Nixon was impeached, but
he was impeached.
But it only went through 2/3 of the Senate, and I think it was going to be clear, so he decided to step down.
Yeah,
and so that was his biggest regret. But he's also, as far as I understand, the only U.S. president to not take Secret Service after leaving office as well.
Really interesting.
And a large part of that is just, of course, just living day to day like a normal person. But really wanting to drive. I guess he was an avid kind of motorist driver. And once you become president, you give up your rights to drive on public roads ever again.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. You have to be chauffeured.
Yeah. I mean, again, golden handcuffs, right? I mean, a different form, but yeah.
My senior year at University of South Carolina, I had 3 roommates, and one of them was a guy named Drew Eagleburger. His dad was Lawrence Eagleburger, who was Deputy Secretary of State under H.W. Bush.
Okay.
And James Baker was the Secretary of State, and James Baker resigned and went to work on H.W.'s reelection campaign against
Perot?
Clinton.
Clinton, yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, Clinton and Perot.
Against Slick Willie. And Ross Perot came into the situation, right? And we know what happened. But when James Baker stepped down and went to work on H.W.'s campaign, Lawrence Eagleburger was promoted to acting Secretary of State. And I went to his house in Virginia with Drew, and he invited me and several other guys, went to college together. I was actually in the Navy at the time, but we went there and hung out for the weekend. And it was really a neat experience to see Secret Service all over the place on the grounds. You'd look out in the woods, and there would be a guy in a trench coat talking into his, sleeve. And they're definitely armed. They had little Winnebagos and little, places, little headquarters set up all over the property. And Mr. Eagleburger, I've had dinner with him a couple times, and it was really interesting, interesting. He's a heavy duty guy, heavy duty.
Yeah, that's quite the posse, you know, to be, you have your own Secret Service. Yeah, absolutely. Secret Service detail, you know, at a normal function, you know, but that's what you sign up for when you take on a position like that, right? Your life definitely forever changes. I mean, for the better and worse. And that's something, you know, that as much as he's on this list of my least favorite presidents now, as much as, again, just a few years ago, even he would have been on my favorite president list, Barack Obama, you know, just think about what him and Michelle and then his kids, you know, go through, like just the scrutiny of being like the kid of the president of the United States, right? And like, I know I talked about Mark Cuban not getting the buy-in from his family going into the 2016 election. And it's like, no, right.
Can't blame them.
Yeah, right.
It's such a commitment. I mean, your life is, when you step into public office to serve at that level, your personal life is over.
Yeah.
And I mean, I wouldn't want that wish that on anybody. And anybody that wants that, God bless them. But I mean, like, say whatever you want about Joe Biden, but I mean, he doesn't have much of a personal life. I mean, you know, now he might, because he's not serving anymore.
I mean, without the oxygen he's hooked up to, he doesn't have much of that.
Yeah.
But no, that is a great point. And, you know, I think, you know, kudos to Nixon to showing that you can step away from that. I mean, again, but you don't get sort of all the other benefits that come with having your own Secret Service detail, getting chauffeured around. But, you know, again, with the good comes the bad. And, you know,
that was gutsy of him, because there were a lot of people in this country that
did not like him,
did not care for him at all after that.
Yeah, and a lot of, he was forced out for a lot of the reason why I think JFK was, you know, wanting to pull out of Vietnam, even though he was credited with escalating a lot. I don't think that was really the case. I think similarly, there's people like under JFK's administration, under Donald Trump's last administration, that were working against them. And it's not just those people. I think the same with Obama. I do still like to think that when Obama was running for office in his first term, he was the change agent that he was seeking out to be, or that he was representing that he was. But I think, again, it's just so easy to get co-opted, and you might think that like they have good interest, or you might even think, all right, no, I can't get co-op, but just you get beaten down over time, and that might be giving him the benefit of the doubt. But I think a similar situation happened with Nixon, that a lot of what he's pinned as for being the bad guy, I don't think in earnest can be attributed to him. And then I think from one of like the best ideas I have literally heard come out of anyone ever, came out of his mouth. And I think the first debate that he had with John F. Kennedy, the one that's notable for being, if you watched it on TV, you thought Kennedy killed it because he actually went and signed up for TV training to show up on camera well, how to handle himself well on camera. Where Nixon, you know, he was a sweaty mess, you know,
he was not wearing makeup.
Right.
Kennedy was wearing makeup and he looked tan and healthy. Nixon, of course, it was black and white, but Nixon was sweaty and real pasty looking.
And just not calm and collected. You could tell that he was a little nervous, where you don't get that on audio, at least as much. But I would love to see this, and maybe I can help make it happen, at least at like a local county level in Forsyth County, where I know it's a very real problem. He was talking about giving teachers benefits similar to like basically having a housing program. And the way that I like to describe it, like a housing program for teachers, think about like the same way that we have VA benefits or favorable loans for veterans or active military. Sometimes there's even like military housing that, you know, is subsidized. And maybe you could talk to this with more information or wherewithal than I can from the military perspective. I know Jonathan, you know, my cousin, you know, who's a veteran. He's talked about some of the benefits that he's been able to take advantage of, or will be able to take advantage of, looking at homes. But why can't we offer some sort of incentive like that to public education teachers, you know, even on like a county by county level? Hey, we can't necessarily necessarily afford to give you $100,000 a year salary as a teacher, but we can make it feasible for you to live within the county that you're teaching in. So you're part of the same community that all of our students are a part of, right? And I think that becomes very powerful in the same way that, like, for police forces, that's often talked about. Like, you want your police officers to be a member of the community, not be an outsider. And oh, wow, that's, Jim at the supermarket, and oh my God, that's not a scary officer, right? And I think in the same way, just having the teachers have more stake of, being in the community they're teaching in, because otherwise, I've seen it in like Forsyth County. You'll have a teacher that the moment a school has a position open up closer to them, they're gone, right? Because who wants to do the 45-minute commute if they could have a 15-minute commute instead, right? And we just need to make it more possible for the right people to be filling those jobs, where I don't think money directly is the answer, because if you just say, let's make teaching $100,000 a year job, I think that opens it up to even more people that are just going to take the safe paycheck that shouldn't actually be teaching because they don't actually want to be teaching. But with something like housing, these incentives, and again, you could put like some restrictions or regulations that you maybe need to already have taught for 4 years, or maybe you need to take on a 4-year or whatever, length of teaching commitment, but have some way to incentivize these teachers to be able to live where, they're teaching, without, again, giving them like direct monetary, pay increases, because then I think it opens it up to people just want to take the job because it's a good paycheck and not because they want to be a teacher and could be good at being a teacher. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, there could be problems that I'm not, seeing with that, but I think that's honestly like an idea that's like so far ahead of its time.
You need to throw this at the town hall, or you need to present these ideas. And I would think that this is, I don't have any info on the teaching, because I'm single guy.
From a military perspective.
Yeah, and I don't have any children, so school districts don't matter to me. I don't pick that. That's a big part of when a family moves into a house area. One of the first questions is, what's the school district like here? Yeah. If it's a nice home and a nice neighborhood, but the schools are crappy and known to be crappy, a lot of people won't move there. They want good schools for their kids. I don't have any kids, so I don't really have any insight on teaching. And
so how do we change that, though? Because that's one of, like, I don't have any kids, right? I do want to have kids, right? And I want to, ideally, if I can continue building iView, at least like the headquarters, the center of iView, right? Like the center of the iView world in and around Forsyth County, I think it's one of the best places around the world. And given I'm not like the most like well-experienced world traveler, but I don't think Forsyth County or like this area of like North Metro Atlanta rates as the highest in any like quality of life metric, but I think it rates in the top 5 or 10 for just about every quality of life metric, right? So there's no real bads to be had here. There's not a big homeless problem, given like we're not a super big population. I think Forsyth County is in like the 250,000 range now, give or take about 25,000. So don't get me wrong, it's grown a lot. We have great schools, at least on paper. I think there's, some artificial inflation going on there, but that happens, everywhere. I think we're just on the better end of it. But I would like to, again, you see how I can like bring this sort of change about to Forsyth County. The town hall, that's for our whole congressional district. I don't know if that will be the best forum versus just our local Board of Commissioners office. But in any case, I think it's something definitely worth moving forward with. And I think I was trying to tie it back to a point that you had brought up as well. Oh, not being a parent, not really caring about the school systems, but like, because I go in and I'm the head of an advisory board for one of the schools in Forsyth County.
You have dealings with schools.
Yes.
And you are with iView.
Yes.
With your company, you have an interest there.
I do, but I've gotten involved well above and beyond like what makes sense from a business perspective. And now I do think, again, every business is a people business. So really the higher I'm revered in the community, the more people are going to want to work with me, or at least being open to the idea of working with me. Right. So I do think there's a benefit in that way. Don't get me wrong, but I do like have a sense of what I wanted out of school but didn't get out of school. I can help be like part of that change, right? And that's without necessarily even it affecting, my hypothetical kids, right? I just want to do it because I didn't, I think there was changes to school that could be made, in this case, there's now these like hands-on learning days that we're doing at the school that I'm the chair of the advisory board, because I was doing some outreach at a Fulton County school here in downtown Alpharetta. And I was like, man, this is a great activity. They have basically, have you ever heard of a hackathon?
No. Hackathon.
A hackathon. Yeah. So
is this a computer?
It's a computer term, but it's typically like it's like a challenge where there might be a couple of challenges that you can like put together a team, or you even as an individual say, I'm going to go compete to make a solution for this challenge within this competition track. And it's like a 1 day long period or a 2 day long period. And you're trying to hack together a solution to this challenge. And oftentimes these hackathons have like a monetary award with them. But this isn't quite like that because it's all just within the school. But it basically gives these students a day off of traditional school and instead replaces it with a group project that they're focused on for the entirety of the day minus lunch. And then towards the end of the day, they're actually in almost like a science fair sort of format, presenting the project that they did, what they were able to accomplish, what their shortcomings were, what challenges are still to overcome if they wanted to like take this to another step, whether it's like building a business out of it, refine the technology that they're, playing around with or toying with, or not the best vocabulary because I don't want to say it's like all just fun and games playing around and toying around with, but, hacking and kind of tinkering with. And in our case, we've done like drone building workshops, or one time we worked with students to take like a weather sensor, attach it to our drone, take a little Raspberry Pi. It's a little like miniature computer that you can write programs on. And the students wrote a program to take the weather data and save it on that mini computer. So turned essentially our drone into a mobile weather station.
Nice.
And so I was like, man, this would be great to bring over to the school that is within my county that I grew up in. And so over the course of a couple of advisory board meetings, I was able to bring down the faculty at one school down to the other to check out that program, the hackathon sort of event as it was happening. And then we just replicated that for the first time, like the day before Thanksgiving. We're going to be doing our next one at the school March 28th. And so I just see ways like that without, writing a check, in the way that, you see a lot of people, give back to schools or the school systems that they went through. And not that, I've achieved some great big success, at least monetarily speaking. I just feel like I'm in a position that I can improve upon, the school system that I went through. It's done a lot for me, given, my parents paid a lot into it as well. That beyond just like a strict business sense, that it's almost like a civic duty, to in some sense. And I just wish, and like I often like work, how can we get more people that have very real skill sets to, introduce those to students that a lot of times they're locked into, the typical path in life. And not to say that any path is really typical in life, but again, just like the worker mentality, you got to go straight from high school into college. You got to, go straight from college into a 9-to-5 job and, try to like define life, to be what it what it can be and like eliminating, all the
as
other
opposed to what it's supposed to be.
Right. Yeah.
This is how this is how it is, and this is how it's supposed to be, and here's what you have to do. Here are the steps. You're talking about look at the possibilities,
right?
All the other possibilities, and you don't have to necessarily go from point A to point B to get to point C. You can go from A maybe to Z to C, whatever, a different route.
And it even
which
goes
is what you have done.
Yeah, and it even goes beyond that from like a entrepreneurial, like business sort of perspective, just like good role models, right? Because again, like so many teachers are overwhelmed by the sheer number of students that they have to go with. And I know like you probably had instances of one teacher or a couple teachers in particular, maybe something they did, something that they said that really stood out with you, that you can still recall those teachers in ways that you couldn't recall most other teachers, I would say, right? And just giving students more of those types of people in their lives that just say that one right thing or do that one right thing to kind of set them off in, the right trajectory for their life. And, whether it's like you going into local classes around here and, showing them that there's more to music than the, classical whatever that, they're kind of. And I know a lot of, more millennial teachers are already starting to do that from like a musical standpoint. But even just from, and again, this is a general statement, because there's a lot of great women teachers out there, but there's been a decline in men teaching as well. So again, luckily we're in a pretty great area where I think there's a lot of 2-parent households and more traditional households. But you get a lot of problems that just perpetuate or get even worse when you have a kid or kids that don't have a great household going into a school where they don't have maybe another great like male role model to look up to. And again, not that there's problems like just not saying you can't amount to anything like if you just have like a single mom taking care of you or like only women in your life or anything like that. But I think there is something to be said, like how do you go from being a boy to being a man, right? And there's a lot of that students just don't get beyond like, again, the strictly financial business aspects, just because they don't have as many male role models in their lives, like something to look up to. And then again, even the male teachers, and again, that's going to differ from school to school, county to county. So even where there's male teachers, a lot of students don't relate themselves to being a teacher unless they kind of are already that student that they know that's what they're interested in, right? And then it's like, well, what am I really going to learn from Mr. So-and-so? He's just a teacher, right? And, in a way a lot of kids think about it, just kind of subconsciously, if you will. Teachers sleep at school under their desk, right? They don't have real lives. They're not real people outside of school. And again, I think as you get older, especially in the high school, most kids start actually thinking about that, more intentionally. But leading up to then, it's like you almost don't like respect teachers. And I'm not saying that I didn't, like I was raised to, but we've also kind of gotten into this society where I've seen it in like a comic strip sort of cartoon where it used to be like your generation, you get called in or your parents get called into the school and to talk with the teacher or the principal or whatever. Oftentimes it might be the parent's going to be on the teacher side, like, what the heck are you doing? Like, you need to behave in school and, like act up, like, don't act up, act right. And nowadays I feel like you get a lot of parents, no matter what the kid is doing, no matter how bad they are, oh, you can't do that to my little Johnny, And so it's not, again, an easy, problem to solve. But I guess this is really just a call to like anyone that even doesn't have kids, I would challenge or recommend you to get involved with your local schools. I mean, as much as it is like problematic, and I brought this up in the advisory board meeting, that it's almost weird though, especially as a male, an adult male, caring about youth, right? And so there's almost like a stigma, like, well, I don't have a kid, so I have no business being around a school, right? And logically speaking, that makes sense, right? But if you can ask yourself, in the words of like JFK, or adapting the words of JFK, ask not what your government can do for you, but what you can do for your government at a very local level, part of the public education system. What can you do to make your students, like the students around you that are going to have an effect on, if in our case, Alpharetta stays a very nice area, right? Because if students coming out of our local schools, aren't learning, what's needed to become, bright, upstanding citizens, Alpharetta is going to go the way that, many suburbs, like LA, went, a nice area, but, you get into one sort of way of thinking or one way of acting, and, it can bring down a whole area over, enough time, 5, 10, 20 years or so.
And just real quick, an interjection. Yeah. I think what he said was, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And it's a fine shade of difference, but government and country to me are kind of two different. Government is government. Country could be all kinds of things.
I've always heard it in the way that you said it as well.
Yeah.
But then I've recently, and I could be wrong, I've recently gone back and heard it again. And I did think I remember specifically saying government, when I have always heard what you can do for your country.
I have heard him say, ask not.
And he's probably said both. And
maybe it might be several speeches but I'm only aware of the one I've heard where he says, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do. And real quick, just to interject, what you're talking about, I think there are organizations out there that address exactly what you're saying. For example, there's the Big Brother program. I don't even know if it's still in existence, but it would be like a guy like you or a guy like me being assigned. You'd probably have to go through a process, a background check, and stuff like that. But you're assigned some young kids that you mentor and you spend time with. There's lots of opportunities to get involved, and I think in what you're saying, and going directly to a school like what you've done, you're to be commended. That is a good, positive thing for sure. For me as an individual, I'm just saying, it's never been
a commitment.
It's never been. When I was in the Navy, I was in school to become a naval officer. I made a point to go back to, it was called the hometown recruiting process. And I went back to my high school and spoke to some of the classes and just told them about, here's what I'm doing. I'm in my uniform, and I'm going into the service, and here are the reasons why, and laid them out. And that was cool. And, a little bit of giving back, but that's not the level that you're talking, I don't think. But
again, at any level, just again, and again, to your point, the boys and girls clubs, that sort of, role modeling is great. Again, it is, it's a commitment, as from what I've heard about it, not something I've actively looked into, but it's like, if you can't commit to at least doing it for a year, don't do it, right? Otherwise, you're actively hurting those individuals more than you're helping them, right? If you're trying to be a role model, but you're not like what we were talking about prior to recording, showing up, right?
You don't show up.
Yeah, that's more than half the battle, as we covered, right?
Because half of these people who are single family homes, they're used to dad not showing up or not being there when he is supposed to be, or vice versa, mom, whatever the case may be.
But just people in their life that should be showing up aren't showing up, right?
I have to just say, for me, this type of thing, it's not been a part of my life. And that's kind of why we're having the conversation. And you're bringing up some good points to open my eyes to look at possibilities. And maybe, I think kind of what I'm hearing you say, to summarize, you're saying in a good society that is on the rise up, we take interest in our young people. We find ways to get involved and to help and to
because it's really kind of selfish, right? It's like, as much as I might be doing this and it helps them, it's also going to help me because it's going to make our country, our county, our
community,
better,
our local community,
and so it's really kind of a selfish act.
Interests in everyone is communicating and discussing politics. It's always on a national level. It's at the federal level. It's something your dad has said that I really agree with, and it is if you really want to enact change,
start local.
Look at your local level, and you're to be commended as well for the town halls that you want to attend and you have attended, and reaching out to local Congress people, because that absolutely is the key. Bring it in and go local, and let's make the change here. And if everyone does that, then the will of the people will be better served.
Right. Absolutely.
More representative.
Again, it's like executive orders, it's hard to go against the will of the people. You can be in power, sign an executive order, and then if that's not the will of the people, that executive order is going to last 4 years. But if you have the will of the people, that executive order will last, the test of time, because the will of the people aren't going to vote you out and demand it get changed, right? And again, it doesn't always work out exactly that black and white, but I think in the long run, at least in our society, if we can keep it going, is by and large up to the will of the people. At least that might be my naively optimistic view. So going through then least favorite presidents, my short list. Thanks, Joe Biden. I think we have to call him Brandon, right? And then Franklin D. Roosevelt. I think he was the first and last American emperor ever to lead this country. Lyndon B. Johnson. I don't want to say he's the guy that called the hit on JFK, but I wouldn't be surprised either.
2 months ago, I was at the LBJ Library in Austin, Texas. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I went to Austin for Christmas. It was really interesting. And if anybody is in Austin, Texas, I would encourage you to go to the LBJ Library. It's about 3 stories of actual exhibits and stuff. And you walk in and, there'll be a room that you sit in. There's a chair with a rotary dial phone and a Time or Life magazine, over here, and the TV's on, and they're showing Walter Cronkite talking about Vietnam and whatnot, and it really shows life in that time frame, 60s. LBJ was called the Master of the Senate. He was a politician.
Oh yeah,
and he was all
world class.
He was all about the backroom deals, and he was what we would call today a fat cat politician.
Oh yeah,
Texas guy, kind of gruff. And they have these cool areas where you pick up a phone and you listen to a actual recording of him talking to various members of Congress, trying to convince them to his side.
Right.
And he used all kind of tactics. He bullied people, and they showed lots of pictures of him saying he was a big guy. I think he was like 6'5" or 6'4". Look it up.
Yeah.
Fact check me.
Yeah. 6'4". Yeah.
6'4". He was a tall guy, and he would lean in. And he get right up on people's ears and stuff. And when you listen to these phone conversations, it's really amazing, because he'll start out talking to a guy and trying to convince him to join a committee or something. And man, his language will get, God damn it, you're going to do this. Your country needs you to do this. He was a very crude man.
Speaking of crude, what I've heard about him, which is kind of humorous, is he would be notable for either whipping it out in front of people, or literally just an open door, have reporters come ask him questions as he's on the can taking a number 2. And
I've heard he had TVs in his bathroom so he could constantly watch the news. I don't know that LBJ, he was a very talented guy for sure and all, but I don't know that he's one of my favorite presidents either, or, one that I would put up. He was a politician.
Yeah, he was a great politician, not a great president.
He got tired of Vietnam, he escalated Vietnam, and then he got tired and he decided he wasn't going to run for a second because all the bad news, the Tet Offensive happened. And,
I think it was also that the writing was on the wall that he wasn't going to win, because who was it that Robert Kennedy was running against, right? Because was it Lyndon Johnson as the incumbent, but he was going to be losing against whoever was the Republican Party. Wallace?
Yeah.
Was it George Wallace?
It was George. I think it was George Wallace. Yeah. Was it McNamara? No. I think it was George Wallace. I don't remember, man. I'm sorry. I was a little kid, if that. This would have been in what are we talking here? 64, 65?
It would have been 64.
Yeah, I was born in 67, so I wasn't here yet or too small to know what's happening. But his presidency was, I think, very much
Barry Goldwater.
Okay. His presidency was very much overshadowed by Vietnam. Vietnam was,
and I'm sorry, it would have been 68. Would have been.
Okay.
So that
was
is not
one.
correct. Yeah, 1964 was the election that he won against Barry Goldwater. And let's see, 1968 did not seek re-election. Let's see. Okay, yep, it was Herbert Humphrey and George Wallace. Yep.
Okay.
And yeah, because he was running as an American independent, which, again, he used to be a Democrat. And that was one of the, the most recent, I would say, switch, other than the one that I would say just happened in this last election cycle, as far as what. And again, I guess this last election cycle, the 2024, wasn't exactly a switch of Republican Democrat in the way that we think about the Republican Democrat switch, where, it was the Democratic Party that was really kind of anti civil rights movement until JFK and RFK came along to really propel the civil rights movement forward. And that was where they had to go do a lot of campaigning in the South because that was unpopular, where it was all Democratic, right? And it was 90+% Democratic.
And real quick, going back to earlier in the podcast, we're talking about Truman.
Yep.
One other thing Truman did, which really pissed off a lot of the traditional Democrats, is he integrated the U.S. military. So he allowed African Americans to take normal roles. They were in in World War II. There were black guys that served in the U.S. military, men, but they were put in a role of administrative and a very secondary role. They weren't frontline combat troops. There were none. There was the Tuskegee Airmen, which was a group of, and that was more of an experimental thing, where I think the goal was, we're going to show you that the African American people can fly these P-51 Mustang fighters, and they did. Some of those guys I think are still alive. I think one of very few, and maybe the last one died just a few years ago, but when he did that,
there's still some,
When he did that, it pissed off so many of the old South Democrats. So what happened? Strom Thurmond from my state of South Carolina, who my grandfather revered and my dad liked a lot, he got mad and he broke away from the Democratic Party and formed the Dixiecrat Party, which was a spinoff, and then. That didn't work out, and so Strom Thurmond rolled on into the Republican, and that's when the time, and this would have been in the '60s, when the late '50s, early '60s, when the Republican Party inherited a lot of the Southern Democrats who were more race oriented people, right. And the Republican Party kind of got the moniker or the bad reputation of being racist or not class caring for, to lift people up. And the Democratic Party grabbed that moniker with Kennedy and supporting civil rights and, with Martin Luther King and all that. I'm rambling, but I'm just saying that's another thing about Truman, that, he was old school, but and the buck stops here. But he was also progressive, in that regard. I mean, integrating the U.S. military was a big deal back in those days.
Yeah, no, I think you covered a lot of good ground there. I mean, George Wallace, again, he was the governor of Alabama during the height of the civil rights movement, where I forget, I want to say his name was James Madison, who was trying to attend the University of Birmingham at the time, and I know there's like 2 instances of like this guy and then another couple of black people wanting to attend schools in Alabama, and then I think one other notable case was in Mississippi. But in the case in Alabama, George Wallace, the governor at the time, was like standing in the doorway, so I think his name was James Madison, could not get into class, get into the building, and that was like Robert Kennedy on the phone.
He called. That was John. Well, it was President Kennedy called him. And,
I think he asked Robert Kennedy too. I could be wrong.
Okay, I was thinking it was President Kennedy that called the Governor Wallace. You're interfering with my plan, or with our
I think it was Robert Kennedy.
Okay.
Yeah. I could be wrong, but yeah.
Can you check it? I'm curious. Yeah. I was thinking that was John F. Kennedy that called Governor Wallace and questioned him about his efforts to block. He brought the National Guard in.
Let's see.
To prevent.
His wife. Wallace left office, blocking the path. All right, standing in front of the entrance. Let's see. In response, President JFK issued executive order, let's see, 111111, which federalized the Alabama National Guard. And the Guard commanded Wallace to step aside. And then Wallace, okay. So, yeah, I guess it was JFK called in the National Guard. But I think there was an actual phone call that Robert Kennedy spoke directly to George Wallace.
I was thinking it was JFK that did that.
Yeah.
But it could have been Robert.
If I have my wherewithal coming into next episode, I could do a live fact check and clear the air there. But yeah, I do want to cover just a little bit more, if you don't mind, and then we can start wrapping it up. So, least favorite presidents, I had Lyndon B. Johnson last said, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and then Harry Truman. And again, Harry Truman was
the CIA.
Yeah. But I do think that's been one of the worst problems in our country. And going back to Joe Biden, who, let's not forget, championed the Patriot Act, and then we want to forget that, when he was voted into office in 2020, like he's always been this upstanding American.
May I challenge you?
Yeah.
So do you think that the CIA, since their inception, do you think that they have done
net positive? Are you asking?
Some positives that have kept Americans safe and have prevented terrorist attacks or wars?
I think in the case of like U.S. aid, it's like there's probably some good that's been done, but I would say grossly more bad than good.
And one of the reasons why you may have that feeling is that kind of thing, the covert operations and whatnot, it's not what we hear that they do good that we hear about, because it's a thankless job. The only thing we hear about the CIA, in my opinion, this is Jim Hampton's opinion, it's the negative stuff that they get caught doing that brings negative attention. I believe that there's a lot of good things that they've done to promote democracy across the globe and Republican ideals.
I think there's also a lot of
ideals.
Promoting democracy across the globe. In other words, destabilizing other countries to make us not the shining example of a democracy, but to make us the, HBIC, if you know what I mean. Do you know what that is? Head bitch in charge.
Oh, okay. I call it HMFIC.
Okay.
Same thing.
Yeah.
In other words,
there was like the former CIA director, William Casey. Well, no, our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false.
That's a quote.
That's a quote directly.
That's not good.
Right.
Don't support that.
Yeah, right. And
I see your point, and I'm no expert on the CIA, so you ought to get somebody in here a historian that can talk about this, because boy, there's a lot of people out there that have a lot to say about this.
And I think the CIA, for its intended purpose of gathering national intelligence, both domestic and abroad, and mostly abroad, because that's the duty of the FBI to do it domestically, and then the Department of Homeland Security. I think there should be better communication between those agencies. But again, the real problem with the CIA is they're given paramilitary operating authority, and that was thanks to Truman.
Yeah.
And then, it was kind of, and I don't know the CIA's involvement directly within the Patriot Act, but the NSA, I think the CIA, FBI, and then I think there's one other like CISA agency that were all granted the ability to kind of indiscriminately go through our devices and our information at the federal level. And that was the act, the Patriot Act, because it sounds so great. Who wouldn't want to support America with the Patriot Act, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then Joe Biden is the one claiming that he championed the Patriot Act, and it's like all thunderous applause.
Who's the national security analyst, Edward
Snowden? Yeah,
Snowden,
the whistleblower. Yeah,
that is a scary situation. That and he's still exiled, right?
Yeah.
I mean, where does he live now? In Sweden or something?
I think even Russia, maybe. But yeah. And I know that was something that Tulsi Gabbard was asked repeatedly about during her confirmation hearing, and she was like, essentially, paraphrasing that. What he did was a service to the American people, but the way that he went about doing it was not through the proper channels. But we're going to establish the proper channels to make it so if this happens again and they don't go through those proper channels, then, they're going to be an enemy of the state, and I'm very much paraphrasing, but that was the gist of it.
The argument is what he did was reckless and it caused collateral damage
and they're supposed to go directly to Congress, and then, bring that information to Congress, and then Congress is supposed to, bring about an investigation and,
he was a what was it? He was computer science, probably degree in college.
I don't know his degree, but he was he was a technical programmer.
Wow,
computer science guy in the NSA. And then Barack Obama, I want to touch on him a little bit because I think again, I, like most young people at the time, were really inspired by Barack Obama. A great orator, but I think he was great at pitching bad ideas, and he could get a lot of buy-in for, not the greatest ideas. And I fell hook, line, and sinker. Now I like to give myself the benefit of the doubt of being literally an adolescent at the time. I mean, as he was coming out of office, I was turning 18 years old.
Yeah.
So
I view him, Barack Obama, he was a very dapper and good and very eloquent spokesperson.
Yeah.
He was a spokesperson. Yeah. He was a tool for the Democratic political machine.
Right.
And I don't view
great
Barack,
mouthpiece. Yeah.
I don't view a great eloquent speaker, great orator, smart.
He was the package pressure. They wanted to pretend Kamala Harris was. I mean, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I don't view him as a strong exec. And we've talked about this before, I want my commander of the executive branch, I want that person to be a take charge type person, because that's the role. I want that to be more in line with a George Washington, a commander.
Right.
Someone who can, I didn't see that with Barack Obama. He was a committee guy. He ran the committee meeting and did it very, astutely. And he was very smart again and savvy and all, but I didn't respect him.
I think there's right ways and wrong ways of going about it, because like Dwight Eisenhower, he was very notorious for having a very hands-off approach, right? And he was very like, hey, let me just put the right people around me. They'll take care of it. And he would be happy going and playing bridge. I mean,
he was the supreme, listen to this, the supreme Allied commander in charge of Europe, supreme Allied commander, European forces.
Yep.
And he had no combat experience. Can you believe that?
No.
The guy who was the brainchild and ran all the thousands and thousands of people that planned Overlord D-Day invasion had no combat experience. He must have really been impressive in the boardroom. He must have really been able to wow people. He must have had a tremendous memory and incredible command of
just
the facts.
Wherewithal, yeah.
I mean, MacArthur called him a schoolboy because he didn't have any combat experience.
Yeah.
MacArthur was older than Ike, right? Older than Eisenhower. And it always is. That'd be a good person to read up on. Would be, and he became a president as well. So
I've done very like surface. I've never done deep dive biographies. I've gone through like Wikipedia pages, and but of course, very notable for the interstate system, which revere him for.
Just getting ready to say that's the only thing I know Ike did when he was president. The only thing that stands out in my mind that was big, under his was the interstate system.
And I think in a lot of people's eyes, he was the first, at least modern warning of the military-industrial complex. His last speech in office.
Yep.
And then George W. Bush. I also, I grew up with my grandmother, Judy, my Andy's,
Right.
wife,
probably didn't
late
like
wife.
him.
No, and again, very much I remember like those are my first like sort of political memories, having conversations via the landline, talking to her while she's in Arkansas, and George W. Bush, liar, liar, pants on fire, and very much for John Kerry. And again, I don't think that George W. Bush was like the liar, liar, pants on fire that he's made out to be. I think especially post office, he seems like a very kind of salt of the earth, down to earth guy. I think again, there's maybe some element of a veneer, to that, but I think he would still be a great guy to have a conversation with. I would love to at some point, especially while he still has his cognitive abilities. It's also interesting. I think that both him and Barack Obama, of course, are younger than Donald Trump or Joe Biden.
Amazing.
That George W. Bush is still younger than both of them.
Yeah.
And then I just don't think he was a strong enough leader to when the decision making got tough that he was like the buck stops with him type of guy. And I think he was willing to delegate that to Dick Cheney, who I don't think was the best guy to delegate to, in my opinion. And I guess something to look more into Dick Cheney. Again, it's Hollywood, so take it with a grain of salt. But just like a surface level look of what Cheney was like, I think it's fairly accurate. Is the movie Vice? If you've ever heard of the movie The Big Short, it covered like the 2008 housing crisis. The Michael Bunbury, I think is his name. That he was like the oracle that saw it all coming.
I've seen that. The documentary. He shorted a bunch of stocks.
Yeah. And one of my favorite movies of all time.
He had to have been, because he was the ultimate contrarian. Everybody else was saying, "Oh, this is going to continue on," and he asked for all these shorts. And which is incredibly risky. One of the rules from a financial advisor that I used to follow, he's deceased now, but he says never short a stock unless you really know what the heck you're doing, i.e. that you have Wall Street experience and company insider type information. Because with shorting, I don't really totally understand it, but with shorting, you can lose you can lose a lot of money in addition to original amount
investment. So I mean, the same producer behind that movie made this like not autobiography, of course, but biopic. And actually, Christian Bale, do you know who that is? Yeah, he plays Dick Cheney in it, which fairly interesting because look nothing alike, but I mean, he really sells himself as Dick Cheney. And of course, they cover the whole Dick Cheney shotgun accident out hunting, and it's an accident.
I think of George W.'s presidency, and I think of Enron, for example. And George W. knew Kenneth Lay. Is that his name? Kenneth Lay?
I don't know, but
no. What was his name? Kenneth Michael
Ken Lay,
Ken Lay, and his right hand man was this real arrogant guy named Michael.
There's Jeffrey Skilling.
Jeffrey Skilling, that was him. Yeah,
okay.
And he's probably still in prison today. But Ken Lay died of a heart attack.
64 years old, 2006. Yep.
Yeah, and George W. He called him Kenny Boy. I had read that. But the Enron just big. See, that's the Republican. That's the stigma that so many people. Your grandmother probably had that stigma.
His tie-ins with
tie-in with corrupt corporate friends of mine. That's exactly how they feel about the Republican Party. Now, I will say, I think that hopefully is the old Republican Party. The Republican Party of today that we're seeing is a newly reformed Republican Party. I don't even know if I'd call it a Republican Party.
Only by name, right? And again, these names get co-opted in the sense that, again, people don't want to realize that, like, just go back and watch that 2016 election cycle. Trump only went into the Republican Party because that's where the opening was for an outsider, right? Yeah. And he went in and made a mockery. And the Republican Party was like, yeah, sure, come on in. You know, what are you going to do? And again, Hillary Clinton, the Clintons funded his campaign in the 2016 Republican primary. Because they thought he would be the easiest to beat in the general election.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Here's an idea, and I'm kind of pulling you away from the presidents, but since we're talking about Trump, here's a prediction. What if, well, this is his second term, so he can't run again officially. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole just yet. But I was kind of going with this idea. Wouldn't it be cool to see Trump
third term? I agree.
Run as an independent and form a new party.
Yeah,
maybe like the People's Party, or you know, the MAGA Party. There's a Republican Party, a Democratic Party, and a MAGA Party. I wouldn't put it past this guy who's saying that he wants to buy Greenland and he wants to, maybe bully into the Panama Canal and take back authority of it, and make Canada a state. This guy's radical, and it's refreshing to see some of the. I'm not saying I agree with all these ideas. To me, a lot of them seem far-fetched, and I've said this before. I think a lot of it is a smoke screen,
right?
To make the media turn in on itself and just chew itself down,
right? While he's getting it done,
while he's getting
work done.
I think that's part of his strategy.
Yeah,
he's one of the first presidents, in my opinion, who has learned to play the media against itself, and he's done it brilliantly. And man, I don't care. He
got ABC to pay $15 million for his presidential library. Yeah. You hear that?
I mean, man, is he bombastic, and does he
Mr. Bombastic
brusque? Is that the word? He says things that would not be considered presidential and whatnot, but you can say whatever you want about him, but he's got a lot of ability to survive, and what he's done, you can't deny it. I'm not going to deny it.
It is amazing though that you can go back, to Howard Stern. I think it was when he said, and they were buddy, right? Back in the 90s, right? And the whole like grabber in the pussy comment that was like misconstrued because it was like they let me grab, so it was like implying consent, by saying they let,
I did not hear that.
Yeah,
I heard him say you can grab them right in the is what I heard. I heard him say that. I didn't hear him. He is a vile man in my opinion. Donald Trump can be a very vile man, or a man that is not as we know him today to be quote unquote presidential. And that unfortunately, and this is what's so sad, that's enough to cause American people
to disqualify
him and to think he's not fit for the office. I think
he's just willing to do that publicly in ways most people are not. Because they don't want this. Oh my God! Can you believe what you said? And it's like, again, the Rod Blagojevich. She had a conversation about like Halle Berry, or one of like the hot actresses that maybe she'll let me screw her. Essentially, he didn't use that word.
You're saying this is Blagojevich?
Yeah, Blagojevich, and and it's like. That's just being a man. That's the locker room talk. And again, Jim, you and I never have conversations like that. We would never, objectify women or, make any, off-color comments.
But when you're in a political, this is the when you're in a political office situation, especially the presidency, you should have some restraint. I feel you should have some diplomacy and be diplomatic.
There's time and a place.
Absolutely, there's time and a place. And of course, he was on a bus for what was that Inside Edition?
Yeah.
He was on a bus, wasn't he? On the inside, he was in an Inside Edition interview on their bus, or they were on his bus or something, and they got him going, and he got into the locker room talk. He even defined it as it was locker room talk. Still, though, you ought to have enough sense to know that you're on recording. You don't think that could be used against you. I remember when that came out, Saturday Night Live did a skit, and they're like, now we're going live to the Hillary Clinton campaign headquarters, and they were dancing, and it showed actress dressed up as Hillary Clinton, and she was dancing to celebrate good time, to celebrate like cool in the game.
Like they just won.
They thought they had won it, and isn't it funny that they still lost?
Yeah, and it goes to show, like, I do think there's something to be said. What I grew up with. Sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt me.
Yeah.
We were on our way up to Virginia, this past Friday, talking to one of our team members. He goes to Kennesaw State University, a computer science major in college. Another student that's with us, and high school senior. And the way that they've heard that saying growing up is, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will hurt forever.
Wow. Well, that's not what I heard either.
No, that's some part of me, but not part of me. That's some pansy ass shit right there.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, no beating around the bush. And I think we need to get more Americans thinking in the way that it used to be.
Yeah, it's toughen up. Your dad has stuttered throughout his life. And I remember having a conversation with him. We were talking about, hey, if we get into a hot conversation, is anything off limits here? I mean, we could say some things that, you get pissed off even with your friends or family. You can say some hurtful things. Yeah. And I was amazed to hear Jeff say, no, nothing's off the limit. You can say whatever you want. He learned through the school, I think, of hard knocks, that you better toughen up, son.
Yep.
Because he stuttered, and I'm sure he got... You think anybody would ever say your dad was stupid because he stuttered as a kid growing up?
Yeah.
Your dad's one of the smartest guys I know, and he stutters.
Yeah.
So that just goes to show, and so that's been something that has resonated with me personally when I start feeling, and I get defensive because I'm human, right?
Oh, yeah.
We're all, but I'm thinking like, man, my father, man, you couldn't hurt my dad at all. The bark was so tough. His father was an orphan, and it was the same way. His dad, my grandfather.
Wow.
Tough as nails, man. Good, American, served in the Navy, grew up in a farm, saw the Great Depression. Yep. We've talked about that. We need to have, at some point, conversation about our past, our ancestors and whatnot, from where they came. But
the history.
This has been a good cast.
Yeah, just a couple more quick comments, though, there. So you're talking about... your grandfather and your grandfather, from a perspective of like the hard times that they had, like having the thick skin, like my dad, I don't want to say had like the same level of adversity. My grandfather, I would say similar, just from like a time perspective. But one thing that really resonated with me from like what my dad told my brother and I growing up is, if someone says something to you that you don't like, it's either going to be true or not true. So if it's true and you don't like it, do something about to fix it. And if it's not true, then, it doesn't matter, water off the back, so to speak. Yeah. And then he also, gave my brother and I always like good comebacks or, whatever to think about. And again, maybe not the most appropriate, but one that stands out in my mind that he gave my brother, who struggled with weight problems, is overweight and getting bullied or made fun of for being overweight. He was having a conversation with my dad, one day, and he was like, well, if that, doesn't work, like if it's not true, don't let it affect you, whatever. If it is true, fix it. You could always use, well, every time I fuck your mother, she gives me a cookie, so that's why I'm so fat,
I think I've heard that one. Yeah.
So we can end it with that, a very presidential episode, right? Honoring our great president that we have right now.
Happy President's Day.
Happy President's Day, or depending on where you are, maybe Washington's birthday. And just one quick little more fun fact. We discussed this, the only president never to marry.
I said it was James Buchanan.
And yeah, that is correct. So,
yeah. And didn't he die shortly after inauguration? I'm thinking at his inaugural speech, he stood out and talked in the rain, or it was misty, cold weather, and he caught pneumonia. He didn't wear a hat. He caught pneumonia, and
he was in office for 4 years.
Okay, so I'm mistaken. It wasn't Buchanan then.
I think that might have been Garfield, but
James Harrison.
It could have been.
Yeah.
And I know, like, James Garfield, he's another very interesting case of being a president. He was not running, but he was saying, like, none of these other people that were running are really qualified. And
we've had some interesting people, and so and
there's a part 2, and maybe next year, or maybe in the meantime. But
we ought to read, especially during times on calendars, patriotic times, or we ought to be looking
special
at this
episodes,
because this is important, man.
Absolutely,
we need to be reading up on our presidents and learning about them.
And again, not that every episode is going to be political, even as these first 3 have been. Obviously, this one being very politically focused, but
because it's President's Day.
Again, just the idea of what autonomous humanity means to me, and hopefully it becomes more the same of you. Like, there is the elements of, like, the drone technology and us coming to live in a world of autonomous technology, right? A blending of technology and humans and autonomous humanity, right? More drones and robots out in public, but the other aspect is really just a self-governing group of people, right?
Yeah.
And our focus is the United States, because God bless America, that's where we were born into. And
given the autonomy of all the things you're talking about, or with the technology and whatnot, the focus is more on the humanity of how we.
How are we going to actually benefit from this?
And how do we better ourselves? And how do we, turn this into a positive thing with this technology and
be the shining light of how this technology can be used when we manage it ourselves, versus we have a centralized body like the CCP that, again, in the perspective from the perspective of drones, they're using it like in the COVID lockdowns, where they're having, government drones fly through the streets with sirens and spraying like pesticide. And it's like, not pesticides, but like spraying like anti-COVID, and that seems very dystopian.
Curfew, curfew, watching the people for curfews and things like that.
Playing out alarms saying, stay inside. Screaming will not be tolerated, because there's a lot of people, like, literally the outside doors to the streets of the apartment buildings were welded shut. So, like, you couldn't go to the grocery store, and many people go in days or weeks. In China. Yeah.
Man, you think of and I know we want to wrap up, but you think of, this is a topic for later. You think of all the cameras that are a part of our society that are, positioned, watching, if there's an abduction, they can go back and look and see good usage in that regard. But on the freeways, you'll look and there's cameras now.
Yep.
We'll see the amount of spying on people with drones. That's another aspect of life in the new drone world.
I think the whole world is essentially
our privacy is under attack for sure.
I think it's only a matter of time until our whole world, inside and outside of buildings, is almost entirely live streamed, in a way that anyone could virtually visit anywhere else in the world and it be like they're there in person in a virtual setting. But not many people are going to, hey, you know what? Let me just come into Jim's house, virtually, because like they have their own life to worry about, right? Most people like to think, oh man, how are people going to judge me? When in reality, there are people, that do judge others, especially when you're in their company or you're like watching their content or wherever the case may be. But by and large, life is out of sight, out of mind. If it's not part of, your inner circle of life, you're not thinking about it. And that's the case for more than 99% of the world. And so I think that sort of issue is overblown to where, hey, everyone's going to have access to this information that the select few government organizations and largest companies in the world already, again, by and large, have access to. Not to the degree that, I'm talking about like almost all of the world inside and out is going to be essentially live streamed. But again, there are organizations with damn near that capability now.
And what I'm saying is from a privacy standpoint, it's going to be like never before.
Yep.
In the immortal words of the great Charlie Daniels, the singer of the Charlie Daniels Band, you better watch where you're going, remember where you've been. That's the way I see it. I'm a simple man, meaning be careful what you do, and you think you're in your privacy.
Yep.
You think you're in privacy.
Always live your life like,
Yeah, I mean, that's the days of what goes on behind closed doors, is your business and your business only. Yeah, I'm just saying, man, for the future, privacy is going to be something, it's a commodity that we take for granted now. And I think as time goes forward with this drone technology like you're talking about and its use with cameras and, cameras that we already have, and I just feel that our privacy it's going to become less and less of something that we can control.
And I think it's already beyond that point, but by and large. But I think individually everyone has control. It's just the alternative sucks. I mean, just frankly put, right? Anyone has the ability to just check out of modern life, the modern conveniences of life, and go live in the middle of the woods, right? And no one's forcing you to, punch in the clock. You might feel obligated to because you want the conveniences and comforts that come along with, the rewards, the paycheck, wherever the case may be. But privacy isn't really at the top of the list or near the top of the list for most people.
I feel it's because it's because they take it for granted.
Yeah,
they take their privacy for granted. This is a big topic that we need to throw out for the future, because we could devote an entire series of casts on this. Man, you can have a lot of people in to talk about this as well. Anyway,
great President's Day episode. Happy President's Day. Anything that you want to promote before we close up?
We're good.
All right, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next time.